Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Laura Lopez. Laura Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in Plata, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Damaris, who were 18 at the time of her birth, love her very much. Tragically, their mother passed away when Laura was just 3 years old, and her 3 sisters were taken care of by their father. Although he initially tried to support the family, he later fell into alcoholism a few years after. Despite the challenges she faced, Laura was known for her sweet and loving personality. Her sister affectionately called her Cello, a nickname that everyone who knew her called. Years later, when their father lost his job, the family needed to find additional work. At 18, Laura started selling fried pastries during the day while attending high school in the evening. In her free time, she focused on caring for her nieces and nephews. At the beginning of her studies, she hoped to secure a good job to improve her family's financial situation and bring them stability. Unfortunately, an unexpected incident occurred that hindered her plans. On September 12, 2019, Laura and Damaris spent the entire day enjoying tea together. Damaris had just completed renovations on her house, and Laura playfully remarked that Damaris had never made tea quite like that before. Regardless, it was a lovely day. Later, Laura went to school, where her classmates noticed something unusual about her behavior. She decided to sit at the back of the class instead of her usual seat and left shortly after 20 minutes, when the lesson ended. When Laura returned home around 11:30 p.m., a friend greeted her. They chatted, had a few drinks, and took selfies for social media. They said their goodbyes at 3 a.m. Laura expressed that she was feeling tired and to get some sleep. The next day, Melissa sent a message to Laura asking if she had seen a doctor for her ear problems. When Laura didn't respond, Melissa started to feel anxious. Worried about Laura's whereabouts, Melissa reached out to Damaris for information, which only heightened her concern. After hours of searching, Melissa and Damaris went to the police station for help. However, they were told they would have to wait 48 hours since Laura was last seen before they could file a missing person report. The officers thought Laura might have had a boyfriend, since it is common for teenagers to encounter situations like this. On Saturday the 14th, the police received a report, and they initiated a search, but unfortunately, it was too late. On Sunday the 15th, 2 fishermen working in the El River's breakwater area, just 15 kilometers from Laura's home, noticed something unusual. They remained calm until they discovered a young girl's body floating in the water, with limbs and a skull. They quickly contacted the authorities to report their find. When the officers arrived, they saw that the attack had been extremely violent, and it was clear that the attacker was skilled with knives. The detectives were actively looking for clues in the crime scene. They found a fabric bag, leggings, and underwear in the river, but they were completely destroyed. During their investigation, they also discovered 2 rings and, after searching the riverbed, found a knife stained with blood. The officers contacted Laura's family, and when Damaris arrived at the location, she quickly identified the clothing as Laura's belongings. Fishermen had found Laura's limbs and skull in shallow waters downstream from the initial discovery, which was then handed over to the forensic team for examination. Dr. Carlos Gordillo conducted the autopsy and determined that the death was caused by a severe blow to the head, which led to internal bleeding and increased pressure in the brain. A blow to the back of the head left her unconscious. Laura suffered between 2 and 4 hours of intense pain. Additionally, bruises were found on her arms, indicating that she had been beaten and had fought against her attacker. And the presence of intimate injuries on her body was a clear indication of sexual assault. Dr. Carlos Gordillo also mentioned that there were cuts on her neck, arms, and legs, suggesting that the attacker might have used kitchen knives. After 3 a.m. on Friday, they analyzed Laura's cell phone. Her last contact was with a 28-year-old mechanic named Alfredo Emilio Escobar. He and Laura had been high school classmates, and he enjoyed hunting and fishing, which meant he was skilled with a knife. His house was 2.5 kilometers, 20 blocks, from Laura's home, making it easy for him to visit. The cell tower signals were strong, and on September 13th, Alfredo contacted Laura 4 times. At that time, the cell towers showed they were both at home. Soon after, both phones were active near Laura's house. Laura's phone traveled to the city center and arrived at Alfredo's residence by 5 a.m. Laura's WhatsApp story featured an alien emoji, and her phone was still being tracked. Alfredo was found at his home at 5:52 a.m. After this time, Laura's phone stopped working, and there was no further communication from her. Records show that Alfredo didn't use his cell phone again until 11:05 p.m. the following day. Alfredo returned home at 12:05 p.m. on September 15th, caught by 13 cameras, including city and private surveillance. Investigations on local stores revealed recordings from the early morning of September 13th, showing their physical characteristics resemble Laura and Alfredo. Laura's then mobile phone was moving, and Alfredo was undoubtedly the only suspect in this case. During the investigation, one of the agents recognized Alfredo, recalling a meeting with him a year ago on Highway 22 while traveling to meet family in the towns of Nguyen and Plotier. At that time, a young man had crashed into a patrol car while driving over 80 kilometers per hour. He refused arrest, leading to a lawsuit. Alfredo was about to go to court for that incident, but now he faces more serious charges. At 8:30 a.m. on September 17th, a police patrol was stationed about 30 meters from Alfredo's residence. While on duty, they noticed a young man resembling he driving away from a Fiat Ducato minibus they had been watching. The police identified him by his face shape, facial features, and hairstyle. He entered a house and later left with 2 adults approximately 60 years old. The 3 of them got into a vehicle and headed towards Highway 22 without drawing attention. The police pursued the vehicle until it stopped in a remote area, around 30 meters from a bridge connecting Nguyen and Saletti. The elderly man Alfredo got out of the vehicle at the same time, and the police asked for their identification. He was with his father and another man, while his mother stayed in the car. It was clear they were trying to leave the city. Alfredo agreed to the identification process but appeared nervous. Soon after, he was taken to the police station and his car was impounded. He underwent a medical examination, which revealed swollen areas on his right knuckles, indicating he had used them to punch. He also had cuts and bruises on the palm of his right hand. Laura's death happened the same day these were found. As a result, Alfredo was charged with raping and murdering Laura. Despite a request to remain silent, he was detained for 6 months over concerns he might escape or obstruct the investigation. On September 1st, a search warrant was executed at the Estrada Street residence where the Alfredo family lived. The property was large, with a construction site and 2 buildings at the back. In Alfredo's sleeping area, officers found fingerprints on the walls. Using luminol to test them revealed blood stains. A blood-stained cloth was also found during the search. The situation escalated when officers went to the building behind the residence and found blood spots on the crumpled vegetation. Blood was also detected on the gates, the right handle of a cart, and at one end of an infrared emitting device. This location was where the fatal blow that killed Laura occurred. The search team collected blood samples for comparison and found that both Laura's and Alfredo's blood were present. The fluid found on Laura's body was examined through DNA analysis. Alfredo's lawyer said the rape charges should not have been brought before the test results were available. However, the results were released shortly. The Ministry of Health Central Laboratory analyzed the samples collected during the investigation. The genetic profiles of both Laura and Alfredo were compared. At the time of his arrest, Alfredo was wearing sneakers, and a knife was found at the bottom of the river. Both were tested. DNA matching Laura's was found on both items. Her genital area was examined using 3 swabs, and Alfredo's DNA matched one of them. This evidence allowed investigators to confirm that he had sexually assaulted Laura. She was killed, dismembered, and her body was disposed of. Law enforcement officials confirmed this during a press conference on September 21st. The prosecutor Juan Austin Garcia believed Alfredo Emilio Escobar was guilty of the crime. He accused Alfredo of killing Laura to cover up the rape and said that if found guilty, Alfredo could be prosecuted and face life in prison. Despite this, more evidence was still needed. DNA analysis technology played an important role in discovering that Alfredo was the suspect. Although he did not plead guilty, the court ordered the seizure of his mobile phone and required him to provide the access code. Despite having Laura as one of his contacts, it was discovered that he had deleted her from the conversation the night she disappeared. He erased Laura's call history, but their social security numbers are still not deleted. Media interviews revealed Alfredo's actions on September 11th, 12th, and 13th. During the investigation, he visited social media platforms to look at photos shared by Laura. Although Alfredo claimed to be innocent, the evidence suggested he was responsible for the murder. Finally, conclusions have been drawn about the incident that took place on the night of the crime. On September 12, 2019, Laura left school around 8 p.m. After spending time with a friend, she mentioned feeling tired and intended to go to sleep. Despite this, Alfredo contacted her at 3:40 a.m. and they began a conversation. Although they were not friends, she agreed to meet him, and then she went to his house. The incident inside the house are unclear, but research shows that Laura avoided any personal contact with Alfredo. In a fit of anger, he sexually assaulted her. Because he was afraid she would denounce him to the authorities, he murdered her. Alfredo led Laura to the backyard, hitting her on the head twice. At that point, she was still alive, but he cruelly hid her body for several hours to avoid getting caught. He also turned off his phone. Laura's body remained in the shed for almost a day, and she died from her injuries. Alfredo used a sharp knife from his kitchen to dismember her body. He then packed the body her parts into his Fiat Ducato minibus and drove 15 kilometers to the area near the breakwaters and left her body there. Afterward, he returned and turned on his phone. Feel relieved that everything has been settled. This case attracted the attention of the whole city. Alfredo's 23-year-old sister made the most headlines when she posted a message on her personal page mentioning both her brother and the victim, Laura. The post received mixed reactions. Some people sympathized with her, while others accused her of being complicit. The younger sister Alfredo's asked Cello and her team to remain vigilant, as her family is involved. Melissa later contacted Alfredo's sister to thank her for the message and asked for clarification. The criminal case was immediately initiated by the prosecution. The initial court hearings were held at the Provincial Legislative Assembly. According to the prosecutor of Nucan, Alfredo was entirely responsible for his actions, and Laura's death was attributed to gender-based violence, in addition to other charges such as rape. In the same hearing, the experts who were involved in analyzing the clothing found in the case, the river, along with the remains and evidence discovered at Alfredo's house, provided their testimony. Florencia, Laura's closest friend, was an unexpected witness. She explained that Alfredo had been messaging Laura for months, inviting her to meet for drinks and socializing. However, they had never met before. Florencia had known Alfredo for 5 years and was aware of his bad reputation. His house frequently hosted parties filled with alcohol and drugs, and intimate acts shared publicly by couples. Florencia had repeatedly advised Laura not to get involved with he, but she consistently ignored. The defense asked why Florencia had not suggested Laura blocking Alfredo's number. Florencia responded that Laura had made that decision and she did not want to interfere in Laura's life. While Florencia was on the stand, a video from security cameras from the day Laura disappeared was shown. In the footage from around 4 a.m., two people can be seen on opposite sides of the screen, heading towards the city center. Florencia admits that it was Laura, stating that her sneakers, jacket, and manner of walking were unmistakable. She also recognized Alfredo. The testimony of Alfredo's friend revealed his impulsiveness when the judge accused him of infidelity. His behavior was characterized by substance abuse and womanizing tendencies. Alfredo's ex-partner, also present in court, stated that their relationship ended badly years ago. She reported him to the authorities because she believed he had stolen from her house and taken money. When she met him to ask for the money back, he chased after the friend who accompanied her. After reviewing the testimonies, Alfredo tried to defend himself. He claimed that his friend, who sold him illegal drugs, was the real culprit. He said that he had been unconscious during the incident that night. He told the local media that he did not commit murder. He explained that he was intoxicated that night, and his friend was also under the influence of drugs at his residence with Laura. When he heard a scream from one of the rooms, Alfredo went to check it out. Seeing blood, he cleaned it up and helped his friend hide the body. In the end, the truth is what truly matters. Despite the lack of evidence, the statement was not confirmed. Alfredo was the only suspect. In his speech, the prosecutor stated that Alfredo took advantage of betraying Laura's trust due to his familiarity with her. He was responsible for the cruelty of his actions and the gruesome method of disposing of the remains. Alfredo Emilio Alfredo was convicted of the rape and murder of 18-year-old Laura Lopez after a jury deliberated for just 40 minutes. This charge is made more serious because it involved an attempt to conceal the attack. The issue of gender violence played a role in the case, leading to him receiving a life sentence without the possibility of release.
It was late on a warm spring night in El Paso, Texas. 4 teenage boys were walking home from a party. Headlights appeared, a car slowing behind them. Moments later, gunfire shattered the silence. 2 of the boys fell. The others ran. When the chaos subsided, the streets were stained with blood. The events that followed would lead to one of the most controversial cases in Texas history, culminating in a confession that changed a young man's life forever. Daniel Villegas was born in April 1977 in El Paso, Texas, a border city shaped by cultural richness and complex social realities. Raised by his mother, Yolanda, in a large, close-knit family, Daniel grew up surrounded by love, laughter, and strong neighborhood connections. From an early age, he stood out for his cheerful, extroverted nature and his playful habit of telling wildly exaggerated stories. It was this light-hearted spirit that made him popular among friends. Less so academic achievements or ambition. Instead, his laid-back charm and sense of humor drew people to him. At 16, Daniel was navigating the ordinary rhythms of teenage life, weekends filled with small neighborhood parties, idle afternoons on the streets, endless conversations about music, cars, and the latest gossip. However, in the early 1992nd, El Paso faced hidden challenges. Gang activity increased, and the public wanted immediate solutions. Police felt pressured to quickly solve major crimes, even if it meant overlooking certain details. This tense environment dramatically altered Daniel's life. On the night of the 10th of April, 1993, Good Friday, 4 teenage boys were walking home from a party in northeast El Paso. As they made their way down Electric Street, a brown car slowly approached them from behind. creating a sense of unease. The car veered off briefly, then returned moments later, its headlights now off. Without warning, shots rang out from the back seat. Panic erupted. Bullets tore through the quiet night. Striking two of the teenagers, 18-year-old Bobby England was shot in the head and died instantly. 17-year-old Armando Mando Lazo was hit in the abdomen and leg. He ran for about 100 meters before collapsing and dying near a neighbor's home. The two surviving boys, Jesse Hernandez and Juan Carlos Medina, escaped, unharmed but terrified. Police arrived to find a chaotic scene, two young men dead, no eyewitnesses able to identify the shooter, and the only physical evidence being .22 caliber shell casings. The city was shaken. Local media quickly dubbed it the Good Friday shooting, and pressure mounted for answers. With no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no DNA, and no suspects, detectives turned to the most readily available tool in their arsenal: forced confessions. They began interrogating local teenagers with any ties to gang activity. Among them was David, who told investigators that his cousin, Daniel Villegas, had once joked about being the shooter. That single, offhand comment was enough for police to act. On the 22nd of April, just 12 days after the murders, 16-year-old Daniel was arrested and taken into custody. He was interrogated for hours alone, without a lawyer or parent present, under intense psychological pressure, intimidation, and fear. Daniel eventually broke. He signed a written confession detailing the shooting. Even though the account was riddled with inconsistencies and inaccuracies, the moment he left the room, he recanted the confession to a probation officer, insisting he had lied out of fear. But it was too late. Daniel's coerced statement became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Despite lacking any physical evidence, he was charged with capital murder. His first trial, which took place in December 1994, ended with a hung jury because the jurors couldn't agree on a verdict. Several witnesses, including his cousin David, recanted their earlier claims. A forensic psychiatrist testified that Daniel had emotional vulnerabilities and signs of mild intellectual disability. But in a second trial held in August 1995, everything changed. With the same coerced confession as the centerpiece of the case, and despite the recantations, Daniel Villegas was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. By 1997, all appeals had been denied. Daniel, once a spirited, playful teenager, now faced a future behind bars. Life in prison was brutal, as he endured violence, isolation, and psychological trauma. Yet, somehow, through it all, he never gave up hope. Behind prison walls, Daniel faced more than a wrongful conviction. He also faced fatherhood. His first daughter was born while he was still navigating the early stages of his legal battle. The details about his partner remained largely private, but years later, Daniel would admit that his absence strained the relationship, creating a painful distance that he carried with him. Despite the isolation and hardship, Daniel was never truly alone. His mother, Yolanda, remained a constant source of strength, visiting, writing, and standing by his side through every setback. Her steadfast support will be crucial in the years to come. By 2007, after more than a decade behind bars, a spark of hope appeared. John Mimbella, a local construction businessman who had married into Daniel's extended family, John immersed himself in the case, reading transcripts, police reports, and trial documents. He quickly became convinced that Daniel had not only been coerced into confessing, but that no physical evidence linked him to the crime at all. John approached the district attorney with his findings, only to be dismissed. Undeterred, he launched his own campaign for justice. He filed a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that Daniel had received ineffective legal representation at trial. The petition was later expanded to include a declaration of actual innocence that was bolstered by new witness statements. Among those who came forward was Jesse Hernandez, one of the surviving victims from the 1993 shooting. Upon reading Daniel's so-called confession for the first time, Jesse publicly questioned its authenticity, stating that it didn't read like something written by someone who had actually been at the scene. In a stunning revelation, Jesse also disclosed that the same detective who had interrogated Daniel had pressured him with similar tactics, threats, and fear, to the point that Jesse, a victim himself, almost confessed to a crime he hadn't committed. Daniel's cousin, David Rangel, also recanted, admitting he wasn't sure whether Daniel had been joking when he supposedly confessed to the crime years ago. Adding to the growing body of new evidence, investigators uncovered information about 2 local gang members, including Rudy Flores, who had reportedly threatened one of the victims weeks before the shooting. According to witnesses, Flores later bragged about being involved. Armed with these revelations, John intensified his efforts. He organized fundraisers and brought in civil rights groups to help mount a serious legal defense. Together with Daniel's family, they staged protests, put up billboards, and painted messages on car windows throughout El Paso, demanding Daniel's release. Their pressure worked. In 2011, a series of hearings were held to re-examine the case. The defense laid out the inconsistencies between Daniel's confession and the physical evidence. They also highlighted the questionable tactics used by the police, especially during the interrogations of Daniel, Jesse, and Juan, the other surviving witness, none of whom had ever identified Daniel as the shooter in court. A key moment came when Rudy Flores, now considered a possible suspect, invoked his right not to testify. Finally, in August 2012, a judge reviewed the new evidence and issued a recommendation. Daniel Villega should be granted a new trial. The court ruled that his confession had been coerced, that his defense had been inadequate, and that new evidence pointed to other suspects. Though the state initially appealed, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the ruling in December 2013 and overturned Daniel's conviction. Not long after, the judge formally suppressed the confession, calling it unreliable and improperly obtained. In January 2014, Daniel Villegas was released on bond after serving almost 20 years in prison. While incarcerated, he received a letter from Amanda Enriquez, who had read his story in the news and wanted to offer him support. Their correspondence led to a strong connection based on faith, hope, and the belief in redemption. After Daniel was freed, they married and had 3 children. Unlike his experience with his first daughter, whom he had seen grow up only from a distance because of his imprisonment, she was in her 20s by the time he was released. Daniel was now able to be present for the births of his children. Rebuilding his relationship with his first daughter was challenging, a source of lasting regret for Daniel. Even though Daniel's confession had been thrown out and there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, the district attorney decided to try him a 3rd time, a decision that sparked controversy. This trial was especially critical for Daniel, who now had a wife and 3 young children. He had experienced freedom and was trying to rebuild his life, but the 1993 shooting still hung over him, and he feared another guilty verdict would send him back to prison permanently. In a moving interview, Daniel, alongside his wife Amanda and their children, revealed the toll the past 2 decades had taken. Despite this, he spoke with a determined yet cautious hope, understanding that his family was both his motivation to fight and his biggest weakness. The 3rd trial would be the final chapter in a saga that began when he was just a teenager. In October 2018, Daniel Villegas returned to court for the 3rd and final trial that would determine his fate. This time, the controversial confession that had once sealed his conviction was no longer admissible. For the first time, Daniel would be judged without the words that had been forced from him decades earlier. Midway through the proceedings, the prosecution extended an offer, a plea deal, legally. It would allow Daniel to maintain his innocence while still accepting a guilty verdict. In return, he would walk free. On paper, it was a tempting deal. After 4 years out on bond, Daniel had rebuilt his life. He had a wife, young children, a job, and a fragile sense of normalcy. But accepting the plea also meant shouldering the permanent weight of a murder conviction, something he had already carried unjustly for more than 2 decades. He knew that while the plea might guarantee his freedom, it would forever stain his name. In that moment of doubt, another exoneree stepped forward. Jason Baldwin, one of the West Memphis Three, who had taken an Alford plea himself years earlier, urged Daniel not to compromise, to take the stand, face the trial, and fight for full exoneration. Daniel made a decision. He would not admit to a crime he didn't commit. Not again. Not ever. The stakes were enormous. The fear of returning to prison haunted Daniel and his wife, but they agreed on a strategy to let the prosecution present its case without interruption. The defense made the bold choice not to introduce new evidence or call any witnesses, not even Daniel himself. It was a calculated move. They believed the prosecution's case had no real foundation without the confession, and that presenting a defense might only validate a narrative that had no business being in court. The true risk wasn't a conviction, but a hung jury. Another mistrial could drag the process out indefinitely, forcing Daniel and his family to relive the trauma once more. While the jury deliberated, Daniel retreated to a private room at the courthouse with his 6-month-old daughter. Cradling her in his arms, he whispered a promise. She was too young to understand that her father was innocent, that one day she would know the truth. And then, after hours of waiting, justice finally arrived. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Not guilty, Daniel Villegas, 41, broke down in tears and knelt as applause filled the courtroom. After more than 25 years, he was finally free and proven innocent. The jury had recognized the truth that the courts had missed for so long. Despite the verdict, the district attorney's office maintained that Daniel was guilty. They argued that he was the only suspect, but the case was legally closed, and they had no basis to appeal. Daniel had been exonerated. Freedom wasn't easy, even after prison. Although cleared of all charges, Daniel still struggled. He received online threats and found it hard to be involved in his children's school activities because of his past wrongful conviction. He relied on his loyal supporters for help. John Mimbella, the businessman who led the campaign to prove Daniel's innocence, gave him a job as a construction foreman. Later, John helped Daniel find work at a law office. Daniel didn't stop at just being exonerated. He started sharing his experience by speaking at universities, conferences, and local events. He talked about how a flawed system unjustly imprisoned him as a teenager and how his faith, family, and determination helped him regain his freedom. Daniel Villegas became an important symbol, representing the tragic impact of wrongful convictions. His story was featured in documentaries, news reports, and podcasts, all detailing the life of a young man who dedicated half his life to proving his innocence. But for Daniel, freedom wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new battle, one for healing, justice, and dignity. In July 2024, Daniel Villegas's situation took another surprising turn. On the 17th of July, he was arrested in El Paso, Texas, for domestic assault. Police reports indicate they responded to a call about a domestic dispute at an apartment in northeast El Paso, near a school. A woman, whose name was not released in court documents, claimed Daniel grabbed her wrist during an argument, causing her pain. Police observed what appeared to be dry blood and scratches on her wrist and forearm. Daniel was taken to the El Paso County Jail, but was released later that day after posting a $2,500 bond. This news greatly surprised the community. For many, the name Daniel Villegas was synonymous with injustice. Now, he faced a new accusation, one that risked reigniting public doubt. But unlike his past ordeal, this case followed a very different path. After a 2-day trial, a jury found Daniel not guilty of the charge. His attorney criticized the district attorney's office, calling the case baseless and irresponsible. Daniel was already involved in a federal lawsuit filed in 2015 against the city of El Paso and several police officers. In this civil case, he claimed his constitutional rights were violated. He alleged that detectives forced him to falsely confess when he was 16 and hid evidence that could have proven his innocence. As of mid-2025, the lawsuit was still ongoing in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas, but a trial date had not been scheduled. The amount of compensation Daniel might receive was not public, but Texas records showed that wrongful conviction cases cost the state up to $80,000, and sometimes more. For Daniel, the lawsuit wasn't about the money. It was about getting back the years he lost and escaping the false label the system had given him. He missed out on his prime years, his 20s and 30s, spending them in prison while life went on without him. This caused emotional harm that continued to affect him after his release. The social stigma, distrust, and suspicion he faced made it hard to rebuild his life. Despite the challenges, Daniel persevered. He stayed in El Paso, working to support his family and rebuild his life. With the ongoing support of his friend and mentor, John, he maintained stable employment and had chances to speak publicly about the risks of coerced confessions and judicial errors. He frequently spoke at university events, sharing his story to encourage change and amplify the voices of those still caught in the flawed system. His case served as a stark reminder of the consequences of hasty and negligent justice, but it also became an inspiring story of resilience, demonstrating the strength of family, faith, and determination. Daniel Villegas fought for his freedom and the chance to rebuild his life, free from a past he didn't create. Even after being proven innocent, his challenges continued. He faced daily obstacles, including rejection, suspicion, and doubt, but he met them with quiet determination. Daniel's story highlights the shortcomings of the American justice system. He now speaks out for those who are still wrongly imprisoned, those whose stories may be similar to his but remain unheard. The most disturbing question is, how many more innocent people like Daniel are still in prison? Hoping someone will believe them, Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's meat market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's meat market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired. Though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship, Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Chepe's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak, was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. On the night before Halloween, October 30th, 2001, police were called to a home in the affluent Coral Gables neighborhood of Florida after an alarm was triggered. Upon arrival, officers uncovered a horrifying crime scene. A woman was found brutally murdered on her kitchen floor in what looked like a scene from a horror movie. Blood covered the walls, with splatters even reaching the ceiling, a clear indication of extreme violence. Investigators determined that the victim, 45 years old Maggie Locascio, had been attacked after parking her car in her open garage. It appeared that the assailant had been waiting for her and struck as she exited the car. Though she managed to flee into the house, the attacker pursued her and ended her life there. Maggie was the estranged wife of Edward Locascio, to whom she had been married for nearly 30 years. They had recently separated and had not been living together for months. Maggie had even attempted to file a restraining order against Edward. Their separation was part of a contentious divorce, driven largely by Edward's repeated infidelities. The process was further complicated by serious disputes over financial matters, making him the immediate prime suspect. Maggie and Edward had met in 1972 while studying accounting at the University of Miami. After graduating, they married and worked as accountants. In 1982, Maggie became a homemaker following the birth of their son, Eddie Jr. Over time, Edward climbed the professional ladder, founding his own company and managing the finances of wealthy Miami clients. Unlike Edward, who was sociable and charismatic, Maggie was described as more private and reserved. In 1992, they purchased a mansion in prestigious Coral Gables, but by 2001, Edward had moved into an apartment in South Beach, just 10 minutes away by car. When police contacted Edward, they withheld the true nature of the situation and told him only that there had been an issue at his former home due to an alarm. They asked him to come by to assist. Edward arrived shortly afterward, appearing calm and cooperative as he spoke with investigators. He displayed no concern or curiosity about why the area was surrounded by police tape or why there were so many officers present. His indifference was notable, especially given that his estranged wife Maggie still lived at the house. Detectives eventually brought him to the station for further questioning. During his interview, Edward explained that he and Maggie were going through a divorce and had stopped interacting. He acknowledged that their relationship had been strained, with disagreements escalating to the point where Maggie had sought a restraining order against him for alleged threats, domestic violence, and abusive behavior. The first hearing related to their divorce was scheduled for the next morning. When police finally informed Edward that Maggie had been murdered, he showed no visible reaction. Meanwhile, Edward and Maggie's 19-year-old son, Eddie, was also being questioned in another room at the station. Eddie stated that he had been at the library that evening, and his alibi was confirmed. After the interrogations, Eddie crossed paths with his father in the corridor. Unlike Edward, who remained emotionless, Eddie displayed visible anger and disbelief. Later, Eddie told reporters that at that moment, he became convinced his father was responsible for his mother's murder. Tensions between Eddie and his father had already been high in recent years, and this tragic event only deepened the divide between them. Eddie openly despised his father, viewing him as a personification of the worst human traits. Despite Eddie's doubts, Edward claimed he had spent the day playing golf and was in his apartment on South Beach, several kilometers from the crime scene. At the time of the alleged murder, CCTV footage from his apartment confirmed his alibi, proving he couldn't have been the killer. Even though Edward was quickly ruled out as the perpetrator, the police remained suspicious of him. He had a strong motive for wanting Maggie dead, and the violent nature of the crime suggested hatred, likely from someone close to her. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have hired someone to carry out the murder. While reviewing the details of the case, a detective recalled seeing a white pickup truck making an illegal maneuver near Maggie's house on the night of the murder. Although he had wanted to stop the driver, he was responding to an emergency call at Maggie's residence. Now, he suspected the truck's driver might have been fleeing the crime scene. When asked if he knew anyone who owned a white pickup truck, Edward denied it. The investigation intensified, and the next day, a local resident contacted authorities about a small sports bag found in the bushes between his property and Maggie's house. The bag turned out to be crucial evidence. Inside were a blood-stained knife, bloody clothing, and Maggie's stolen credit cards. The bag was sent to a crime lab for analysis, where investigators hoped to find DNA, fibers, or fingerprints to identify the killer. 2 days after Maggie's death, Edward reported a break-in at his office. Police found no evidence of theft, but the office was in disarray, with documents scattered on the floor, taking advantage of the situation. Detectives interviewed Edward's employees about him and his family. A worker revealed that Edward's brother, Michael Locascio, owned a white pickup truck, the same type of vehicle spotted near the crime scene. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation. Michael, who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, was quickly located by police. His truck immediately attracted attention because the seats had just been upholstered. When police removed the seat covers, they found the old fabric was stained and showed signs of having been pressure washed, possibly to remove evidence such as blood, since a complete clean was not possible. The seats were upholstered with new fabric. Unlike Edward, Michael had a troubled history. At 41 years old, he was unemployed, struggling with a banned substance addiction, and had a prior fraud conviction. It seemed plausible that he might commit murder, particularly if motivated by a banned substance or financial gain. Although no incriminating evidence directly connected Michael to the crime scene, the sports bag near Maggie's house became a critical clue. Latex gloves inside the bag contained Michael's DNA. Tests ruled out Edward and Eddie, confirming Michael as the likely suspect. 2 weeks after Maggie's murder, the lab results were finalized, and Michael was charged with killing Maggie. Eddie was shocked to learn that his uncle, Michael, was involved in the incident. He suspected that Michael could not have acted alone, because how could someone who lives so far away travel so far just to commit a crime? Eddie suspected there was more to the story and thought his father might somehow be connected. Regardless, the police needed concrete evidence to prove anything further. While there was no direct evidence implicating Edward, his brother, Michael was preparing to stand trial. Meanwhile, Edward continued with his everyday life, going to work and even dating. Michael faced murder charges, with prosecutors hoping he would confess and implicate Edward, who was believed, according to Eddie, to be the mastermind behind the crime. Prosecutors were confident they could uncover the truth, especially given that Michael faced the death penalty if convicted. Despite strong pressure, Michael firmly refused to plead guilty or testify against Edward, asserting his innocence. During the trial, prosecutors made it clear they believed both Michael and Edward were involved. However, this did not change Michael's stance. Although the prosecution presented strong evidence against Michael, much of it was circumstantial. His defense lawyer argued that the evidence was questionable due to procedural errors during the investigation and lab work. Furthermore, there was no clear motive, and much of the case relied on indirect evidence. Despite these arguments, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before finding Michael guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment likely designed to pressure him into confessing or exposing Edward's role in the crime. After the verdict, Eddie stepped in, determined to fight what he saw as an unjust decision. At just 19 years old, Eddie had already graduated from college and was attending the University of Miami Medical School, where he excelled academically. His relationship with his father, Edward, had always been strained. He never even called him Dad, referring to him as Ed instead. He pursued his studies with one key purpose: to help his mother, Maggie, escape her abusive marriage. Despite his efforts, he was unable to save her. However, he gained financial independence and tried to help her secure a divorce. Starting with a court injunction against Edward, Eddie believed his father's refusal to split their assets fairly was at the heart of the conflict. Under Florida law, divorcing spouses were required to divide their wealth equally. Edward, whose fortune was estimated at $6 million, refused to comply. He even tried to hide some of his wealth, but Maggie, an experienced accountant, discovered his deception and was determined to expose it. According to Eddie, Maggie was murdered because she was planning to reveal Edward's hidden accounts to the court just hours before their divorce trial began. The day after her murder, Edward's lawyer petitioned the court to terminate the divorce proceedings due to Maggie's death, a move that struck many as suspicious and calculating. With the case dismissed, Edward stood to retain control of all the family assets. Eddie was horrified by his father's cold reaction to his mother's death. He seemed entirely unbothered, despite having been married to her for years. Edward's greed and lack of remorse convinced Eddie that his father was responsible for the murder. Seeking justice, Eddie filed a civil lawsuit to block Edward from taking complete control of the family fortune and won the case. However, he faced significant challenges with the criminal investigation, which stalled for years. After 4 years with no progress, prosecutors doubted they would ever uncover the truth. Everything changed in November 2005, when authorities decided to move forward with the evidence they had, believing no new leads would emerge. Edward Locascio was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder his wife, Maggie. Eddie saw this as a significant victory, but it was just the start of a much tougher battle. After spending 4 years securing a conviction against his uncle Michael for his mother's murder, Eddie now faced the challenge of bringing his father, Edward, to justice. This trial was far more complex due to the absence of direct evidence. In Michael's case, the crime scene held undeniable proof, including DNA and the murder weapon. However, Edward's charges rested solely on circumstantial evidence, giving his defense team considerable room to argue. The prosecution claimed Edward orchestrated Maggie's murder due to a strong financial motive. During their divorce proceedings, Edward stood to lose a large portion of his assets. Although he had hidden much of his wealth in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Maggie had uncovered the deception and planned to expose him in court. Unwilling to let this happen, Edward allegedly convinced his brother Michael to carry out the murder. Prosecutors argued that Edward had not only planned the killing, but had also influenced Michael to commit the brutal act. Graphic photos revealed the horrifying nature of Maggie's death. She had been savagely attacked with both a knife and a baton. She suffered multiple blunt force injuries that caused fractures, and the assailant had continued stabbing her even after the initial beating. The prosecution contended that this extreme violence stemmed directly from Edward's malicious intent. With little concrete evidence tying Edward to the crime, the case relied on motive, circumstantial evidence, and key witness testimonies. The first major point of suspicion came from Edward's lack of reaction when he was informed of Maggie's death. Although there was no written or recorded evidence of a conspiracy between Edward and Michael, phone records showed a spike in the number of calls between the brothers in the weeks leading up to the murder. Previously, they had only communicated occasionally on special occasions, but records showed that they had begun calling each other on an unusually daily basis 6 weeks before Maggie's death. This sudden change became a major point of suspicion for investigators. The prosecution argued that Edward used these calls to pressure Michael into committing the crime and to finalize the plan. A critical witness was Edward's secretary, Gudile Gonzalez, who testified that she overheard several phone calls between Edward and Michael. After realizing the nature of these conversations, Goodallay said Edward began threatening her, warning her to stay silent or risk being killed. Frightened, she eventually went to the police. Eddie, Edward and Maggie's son, also took the stand, recounting years of abuse Maggie suffered during her marriage. He described instances in which Edward had beaten his mother, threatened her, and even came close to hitting her with a heavy sculpture. According to Eddie, Edward openly threatened to kill Maggie 5 months before her death, after she revealed her intention to file for divorce. Tensions escalated when Maggie caught Edward having an affair with Eleanor Salazar, a masseuse. Eleanor also testified in court, stating that she was at Edward's house at around 11:30 p.m. on the night of the murder and witnessed a conversation between Edward and Michael. Surveillance footage from Edward's house supported Eleanor's account. The video showed Michael arriving at Edward's home around midnight, drenched and visibly distressed. He was seen gesturing wildly, which the prosecution interpreted as a sign that he had just finished cleaning blood out of his truck. Eleanor further testified that Edward later threatened her, warning that she would suffer a fate worse than Maggie's if she went to the authorities. Surveillance footage partially verified Edward's whereabouts that night, while bolstering Eleanor's credibility. Financial records also uncovered Edward's multi-million-dollar offshore accounts, which he had concealed during the divorce to limit what Maggie could claim. This financial evidence reinforced the prosecution's claim about Edward's motive, emphasizing that Maggie's knowledge of his hidden assets posed a serious threat to him. Edward's behavior after the murder raised serious concerns. He quickly moved on with his life, even starting a new relationship. During an argument with his new girlfriend, Edward allegedly threatened her, stating that she would end up like his wife. Alarmed by this threat, she decided to report it to the police. In court, the prosecution presented a gruesome reconstruction of the murder. Using a mannequin, they demonstrated how Michael brutally attacked Maggie. She suffered 8 blows to the head with a metal baton but remained conscious and tried to defend herself. The assault bent the baton, rendering it useless. Maggie sustained severe defensive injuries, including nearly losing a finger while trying to protect herself. Despite her resistance, Michael continued his attack, pinning her against a wall and eventually standing on her chest to ensure her death. Blood evidence found throughout the house supported the prosecution's narrative. However, Edward's defense focused on the lack of direct evidence linking him to a conspiracy with Michael. There were no written or recorded agreements or explicit discussions about the crime. However, the prosecution asserted that Edward had a clear motive, suspicious behavior, and personality, and called on the jury to consider the circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Following the murder, no money was transferred to Michael, and Edward did not provide him with any support while he was in prison. Michael appeared to gain nothing from the crime and had no clear motive to kill Maggie. Initially, investigators speculated that the killer might have had a secret relationship with Maggie, but there was no evidence to confirm this, as they had no prior contact. Edward's lawyer argued that the attack was random, possibly driven by Michael's mental state or substance abuse. In contrast, the prosecution maintained that Edward had strong motives to want his wife gone. Adding to the complexity, Edward's defense painted him as a kind and loving husband and father. They presented photos of a happy family life and called witnesses to attest to his character. The defense also attempted to shift the narrative by suggesting that Eddie, Edward's own son, may have had a financial motive to target his father in order to inherit the family's wealth. The most damaging testimony came from Edward's secretary, Goodallay. She testified that Edward had threatened her and stated that Michael would kill Maggie. The defense countered by arguing that Goodallay's story had changed multiple times, which weakened her credibility. The prosecution explained her inconsistencies as stemming from her discomfort with Edward's explicit and obscene language, which she rephrased for the jury. Nevertheless, her changing story raised questions about her reliability. Further complicating the situation, the defense pointed out that Goodallay was in a long-term romantic relationship with the lead detective on the case, which raised ethical concerns. By the time of Edward's trial, she had been living with the detective for over a year. The defense argued that this relationship undermined her testimony, suggesting that her involvement was part of a deliberate effort to bias the case against Edward. Another key point presented by the prosecution was the 39 phone calls exchanged between Edward and Michael over the course of 6 weeks. Previously, the brothers had little to no contact, often going years without speaking. The content of these calls remains unknown. The defense argued that the calls were innocent, suggesting that the brothers had simply grown closer during Edward's divorce proceedings. However, the dramatic increase in communication heightened the suspicion surrounding Edward's involvement. The argument that Edward had a financial motive for murder was dismissed. Even if he had lost half of his assets in a divorce, he would still have remained a millionaire, making it illogical for him to take such a drastic action. The defense also claimed that Michael, due to his struggles with addiction and mental health issues, might have committed the crime without having a clear motive. They suggested Michael could have misinterpreted Edward's frustration over the divorce and acted impulsively against Maggie. Furthermore, the defense argued that Michael's unstable nature would have made it unlikely for him to remain silent and not implicate Edward, especially when facing the death penalty. After both sides presented their cases, the jury deliberated for several days. The case was challenging, as it relied primarily on circumstantial evidence. Initially, the jury debated Edward's and Michael's motives, but eventually focused on Edward's potential financial incentives and Michael's apparent lack of motive. On the third day of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Edward Locascio was found guilty of first-degree murder. His son, Eddie, and his grandmother were present at the sentencing. Eddie expressed relief over the verdict, feeling that justice had finally been served after 6 long years since his mother's death. Although Edward initially faced the possibility of the death penalty, the jury recommended a life sentence without parole, which was ultimately imposed. Given Edward's age, this effectively meant he would remain in prison for the rest of his life. However, the decision enraged Eddie, who firmly believed that the death penalty would have been more appropriate. 6 months into his imprisonment, Edward gave an interview where he continued to proclaim his innocence. He denied encouraging his brother Michael to commit the murder, claiming that he had hoped to reconcile with Maggie before her death. He insisted he never believed Michael was capable of such a brutal crime and alleged that both he and Michael had been framed. Michael also maintained his innocence and never confessed. Nevertheless, DNA evidence confirmed his involvement, and the timing of the murder, just before a contentious divorce hearing, was difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. During the interview, Edward suggested that his son, Eddie, may have orchestrated the crime. He theorized that Eddie, eager to inherit his parents' fortune, might have set him up to take the blame. Edward reiterated that the divorce settlement would not have left him destitute, leaving him no reason to kill Maggie. Eddie strongly denied these accusations. Edward Locascio later passed away on August 30th, 2018, at the age of 67 in a prison hospital in Lake Butler, Florida. The home where the murder occurred was eventually sold for $3 million. Eddie went on to become a doctor, dedicating his life to helping others. It was a quiet December night. The children were asleep, and the house was peaceful. However, something terrible was happening behind a closed door. By the next day, Lindsay Quay had disappeared. There were no phone calls, no notes, just silence and a strange account from the man who lived with her. Initially, no one knew what to make of it, but as time went on, the truth began to emerge. What really occurred that night in Southport? Lindsay Wilson was born in the seaside town of Southport, near Liverpool. As one of 6 children in a loving and supportive family, Lindsay flourished in the caring environment provided by her parents. She had a strong bond with her siblings, especially her brother, Peter Wilson, who was just a year older. They shared laughter, secrets, and close friendships. Lindsay had a magnetic personality that attracted others. radiating energy, compassion, and joy. Her life changed dramatically in 1995. Lindsay had first become involved with Mitchell Quai when she was 17 and pregnant by another man. Her brother introduced them. He worked with Mitchell at a local casino. What started as a promising relationship quickly escalated into a passionate romance. Within a week, they were engaged, and just weeks later, they were married. However, the celebration was muted. Mitchell's family was largely absent from the wedding, with only his brother, Elliot Quai, present. On that same day, Lindsay's father witnessed their first argument, a troubling sign of the difficulties that lay ahead, although no one could have anticipated just how severe their challenges would become. Mitchell grew up in Essex, but relocated to Southport as a teenager after the tragic loss of his mother. With a father frequently absent for work and a younger brother to look after, Mitchell had to mature quickly and face life on his own. This hardship transformed into a more troubling side of his character. In the early stages of his marriage, Mitchell's initial charm disappeared, revealing a harsh and unyielding personality. He became possessive and unpredictable, insisting that everything go his way. Lindsay, who had hoped for a stable life, now felt completely trapped. 6 weeks after the wedding, Lindsay's daughter, Robin, was born. Mitchell began to disappear for days at a time, leaving Lindsay and Robin while he pursued affairs and wild nights. When he returned, he brought roses and offered apologies. This created a cycle of abuse that only grew tighter. Desperate to hold on to the man she once loved, Lindsay repeatedly forgave him. However, each forgiveness made her feel more diminished. Mitchell's control over her became more deceptive. He started to distance her from everyone important in her life: friends, siblings, and even her father, who had always been her protector. Gradually, he made himself the sole influence in her life. Lindsay found herself increasingly isolated, with every escape route blocked by the man who claimed to love her. 18 months after they married, Lindsay sought to escape her situation and turned to a local support center for single mothers, where she found a place to live. For a short time, she felt some relief. However, Mitchell tracked her down, filled with apologies, promises, and tears, which led them back into the same toxic cycle. Lindsay returned home, and soon after, she became pregnant again, hoping this new start might bring change. She approached her pregnancy with quiet determination. She might have believed that the baby could transform Mitchell. Victims of abuse often suffer from misplaced guilt, feeling as though they triggered the pain they endure. Unfortunately, nothing improved. Lindsay's mum reveals she stopped visiting her daughter because she didn't want to see Mitchell, and that the last time she saw her was on December 13th. On Christmas Eve, Mitchell visited Mrs. Wilson to collect the children's presents and told her that Lindsay was getting ready to go out. While the family felt uncomfortable, they weren't overly worried, as her absence had started to feel normal. However, as the holidays went by, without any news from Lindsay, their concern grew stronger. It was 6 weeks before a social worker reported her missing. Due to Lindsay's history of domestic abuse, the police responded quickly. Mitchell claimed that Lindsay had left just before Christmas, when she packed her bags and walked away, never to return. He insisted that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. However, both Lindsay's family and investigators found his account suspicious and doubted his statements. By April the following year, police discovered Mitchell had been withdrawing benefits in Lindsay's name. They arrested him on suspicion of murder, solicitation to cause grievous bodily harm, and fraud. Although he downplayed the seriousness of his actions, his comments unsettled those who heard them. He stated he wouldn't even help her if she were in danger after what she did to him and the kids. As time went on, suspicions about Mitchell intensified. He appeared completely untroubled and showed no signs of sadness. He gave interviews, portraying himself as a victim who had been deserted. However, investigators weren't fooled by his performance. They suspected that Lindsay never left the house alive, but they lacked evidence: no body, no confession, and no clear proof. The central question was, where was Lindsay Quai? While Lindsay's family desperately searched for her, Mitchell seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight, with cameras rolling and reporters watching. He presented himself not as a grieving partner, but as someone who thrived on the attention. Mitchell even sent the detective a Christmas card with a bottle of hair dye and a note telling him to get rid of the gray hair to feel more confident. He reported to the authorities that he had seen Lindsay around town, specifically near shops, and in a black Mercedes with another man. He insisted she was nearby and that he could recognize her, yet no one else ever spotted her. He depicted himself as a victim of suspicion rather than tragedy. His statements were inconsistent and lacked any evidence to support them. Despite thorough forensic investigations, no conclusive evidence was found in the home he had shared with Lindsay. Investigators did discover significant purchases of cleaning supplies, which raised concerns, but without a body or evidence of wrongdoing. The case has reached a standstill. While Mitchell misled the media and law enforcement, Lindsay's family faced overwhelming silence. Her father, Peter, spearheaded a persistent search for her. He distributed flyers throughout neighborhoods to seek help and to confront Mitchell with Lindsay's image daily. He scoured canals, ditches, and muddy woods, holding on to hope but increasingly feeling despair. Peter suspected Mitchell was involved, but without a body, a confession, or any closure, he was left with grief and unanswered questions. Each week, Peter confronted a terrifying reality as he picked up his grandchildren from the man he believed killed his daughter. He maintained a calm voice and neutral expression, but beneath his composed facade was an anger he struggled to contain for Lindsay, for her children, and for the elusive truth. A pivotal moment occurred on June 9th, several months after Lindsay went missing, when police officially declared her dead. On the same day, they arrested Mitchell for her murder. During police questioning, he declined to provide any information, repeating the phrase "no comment." The evidence against him was weak, just bits of circumstantial evidence and a pattern of troubling behavior. Then, unexpectedly, after only one night in custody, Mitchell confessed. He revealed that he had killed Lindsay on December 16, 1998. That evening, they argued in their bedroom, just steps away from where their two young children were sleeping. Lindsay allegedly said she wanted a divorce. Mitchell grabbed her by the neck and held her to the floor for 20 minutes. He then placed her body in the bedroom and sealed the door with a towel to prevent her two children from smelling the corpse. In the following 48 hours, Mitchell committed a horrifying act. In the attic of their family home, he dismembered Lindsay's body. He didn't do this alone. His brother Elliot, who had previously worked in a butcher shop, assisted him. Police believe Elliot's experience helped minimize evidence and avoid mistakes. Elliot Kwai was not known for being independent. Investigators described him as having limited cognitive abilities and likely needing special care. His life centered around his older brother, Mitchell, who had a significant influence on him. Unfortunately, this influence led Elliot into a dark situation. After confessing to a murder, Mitchell guided investigators to where he had hidden the remains of Lindsay. The discoveries were disturbing. Miss Kwai's dismembered body was found in a shallow grave near a roller coaster at Pleasureland in the seaside resort of Southport, Merseyside. Her arms and legs were later found wrapped in plastic bags in separate places on a railway embankment. A bin bag containing her head and hands, believed to have been buried in 200,000 tons of rubbish at a Lancashire landfill site, has never been recovered. One disturbing detail emerged during the investigation. Mitchell likely disposed of Lindsay's remains while out walking with his children. This cold and calculated approach, using casual outings as a disguise, was both unsettling and clever, as he knew how to avoid suspicion. In January 2001, the case went to trial at Liverpool Crown Court. However, before the trial began, Mitchell attempted to change his confession. He claimed he hadn't killed Lindsay, but had only dismembered and discarded her body. His story was so far-fetched that even his own legal team urged him to drop it. Ultimately, Mitchell pleaded guilty to all charges. The court found him guilty not only of murder, but also of obstructing justice and misleading law enforcement. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Meanwhile, Elliot received a 7-year sentence, which many members of Lindsay's family felt was too lenient. The outcome brought some relief, but it did not bring peace. Sadly, just 3 months after the sentencing, the family faced another heartbreaking tragedy. Lindsay's brother, Peter Wilson Jr., was found dead in the attic of their childhood home. He had taken his own life, leaving no note, but those who knew him understood the reason. Peter had never forgiven himself for introducing Lindsay to Mitchell. In the months following her death, he fell into a deep depression, isolating himself and overwhelmed by guilt. He often expressed that his life felt meaningless without his sister. Tragically, it was his father, who had already been burdened by Lindsay's loss, who discovered Peter's body. At that time, Peter's fiancée was pregnant, meaning another child would grow up without knowing their father, yet another victim of the devastation caused by Mitchell's actions. In 2017, Mitchell became eligible for parole. Lindsay's daughter, Robin, who was only 22 at the time, started a campaign to stop his release. She created a petition on Facebook that gathered thousands of signatures and became a powerful call for justice. The public's anger contributed to the rejection of Mitchell's parole requests. By 2022, he had been denied parole 3 times. His ongoing manipulative behavior in prison, such as aggressive outbursts and involvement in illegal substances smuggling, reinforced the arguments against his release. Lindsay's children, Robin and Jack, were brought up by Wilson family in a loving and stable environment, which was the kind of upbringing their mother always wished for them. Their story today serves as a powerful reminder that there are often people behind closed doors who are quietly asking for help. Lindsay Kwai's 1998 murder by Mitchell Kwai tore through her family and Southport's quiet streets. Her cheerful spirit, the light to her children, Robin and Jack, was lost in a barbaric act. The pain deepened when her brother, Peter Wilson Jr., took his own life. Despite this, the Wilson family found strength. Robin's courageous fight kept Mitchell in prison, honoring her mother's love. Southport's community rallied, sharing flyers and holding vigils to keep Lindsay's name alive and warn against domestic abuse. Meanwhile, her unrecovered remains leave an ache, but Robin and Jack thrive in the caring home Lindsay always wanted. Her story begs us to notice those trapped in silence, to offer help, and to hold loved ones close before it's too late.
Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Matthew Hoffman. Matthew Hoffman was born on November 1, 1980. Little is known about his childhood, but he was probably a quiet and somewhat withdrawn child who was loved by his parents. Although there may have been some strange traits in his behavior, they did not indicate that Matthew was a danger to others. He was very fond of plants, especially leaves. Matthew was a loner with no friends, and many people thought he was strange, even suspecting that he might have mental problems. He graduated from high school, but did not pursue further education. After getting a job as a plumber's assistant in Colorado, Matthew, with no friends or acquaintances to help him, secretly stayed in a corner of one of his clients' apartments while they were away. When he learned that the landlord was returning, instead of cleaning up and leaving, he set fire to the apartment to hide his presence. Matthew was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he only served 6 years and was released early for good behavior. In 2009, after returning to his hometown in Ohio, he bought a small house. He began dating a woman who had a young son from a previous relationship. Things went well for a while, as they all lived together until late 2010. Matthew's neighbors noticed a sudden change in his behavior. Previously, he enjoyed playing with the neighborhood kids and his girlfriend's son. However, he recently became irritable and angry. His girlfriend was fed up with this behavior, so she packed up and moved out of his house with her son. As a result, Matthew's situation worsened, and he lost his part-time job as a tree trimmer. The reason he was fired was that he was not doing a good job. Instead of working, He would sit in a tree for hours, staring into space. After losing his job, he began to live more frugally. A neighbor reported that he turned off the lights in his entire house to save on bills. He then built a platform in one of the trees on his property and spent hours sitting there, watching the neighborhood. Neighbors advised their children not to play outside while Matthew was in the tree, as they found his behavior very disturbing. He would sometimes catch and kill squirrels, cook them, and eat them, which one neighbor believed was because he had no money and could not afford food. A few weeks after breaking up with his girlfriend, she returned to collect the last of their belongings. They had a heated argument that escalated, and Matthew attempted to strangle her. Although she initially filed a lawsuit, she changed her mind and dropped the case a few days later. In November 2010, Matthew began behaving strangely and was found stealing various items. He soon developed a new hobby of breaking into homes in his small town. One house that caught his attention was located in the suburbs near a wooded area. He spent a lot of time in the trees watching the house. The occupants of the house included 32-year-old Tina Herman, her 2 children, 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, and 11-year-old Cody Maynard, and her boyfriend. The garage door was not properly locked, allowing Matthew easy access. Although there are neighboring houses, they are far enough away that no one can see or hear anything unusual at night. On November 9, 2010, Matthew was in the woods when he saw Tina's boyfriend leave for work at the distribution center at 3 a.m. It was still dark, and he was supposed to be gone for at least the day. Matthew then noticed 2 children leaving for school, followed by Tina, who left at 9 a.m. Thinking that she was leaving for work, Matthew decided to pack his things and break into Tina's house through the garage. He spent the next few hours exploring the rooms and slowly gathering items to put in bags. Usually, burglars are quick and take what they want before leaving. However, Matthew moved slowly around the house. When he heard a car approaching, he realized he might be spotted, so he quickly hid in the furthest room, which turned out to be Tina's bedroom. Tina Herman returned home after a walk with her friend Stephanie. They had the day off and had gone shopping together. When she got home, Tina took her bag into the bedroom to put away the things she had bought. In the meantime, Matthew hit her on the head with the handle of a large knife, causing her to flinch and scream. He then attacked her. Stephanie, Tina's friend, took the things she had bought out of the car to bring into the house. When she got inside, Matthew suddenly attacked her. She tried to escape, but he was faster and caught up with her. A dog lived in the house, and it started barking loudly during the chaos. Matthew eventually dealt with the dog. After the crime, instead of running away, Matthew dragged the 2 bodies into the bathroom. There, he started to process their bodies and place them in trash bags. After filling the bags, he carried them to Stephanie's car, which was parked nearby, and loaded them into the back of the car. After finishing, he returned to the house to clean up the scene. While inside, he heard Tina's children, Cody and Sarah, coming home from school, so he hid and waited for them to come in. Shortly after, Matthew attacked Cody. The boy tried to escape, but Matthew struck him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Sarah ran down the hall to her room and tried to close the door to keep Matthew from entering, but he broke it open. Instead of killing Sarah, he found an electrical cord in her room and tied her up. He then covered her head with a pillowcase, picked her up, and carried her into the kitchen, where he laid her on the floor. Sarah was silent for an hour, listening to Matthew handling the body Cody's and mumbling to himself. He then picked Sarah up, carried her outside, and placed her in the back seat of Stephanie's car, along with the body bags. After driving about a mile to his parking spot in a secluded area, Matthew carried Sarah into his car and drove home. When he arrived, he locked her in the bathroom after gagging her. He then went back to Stephanie's parking lot to hide the garbage bags containing the body parts. He returned to his house, where he found himself exhausted and falling asleep. But before he fell asleep, he tied Sarah to him with a rope to prevent her from escaping. While Matthew slept, Sarah looked around the house and saw something strange. The floors and walls were covered with leaves, and there were bags filled with leaves scattered all over the house. When Matthew woke up, he decided to move Sarah to the basement, a small corner used for storage. He placed a blanket inside, put a pile of leaves on the ground, chained her up, and gagged her again. Matthew planned to go back to Tina's house to burn it because he couldn't clean up the blood at the scene. He drove Stephanie's car to Tina's house and parked it in the garage. He then took Tina's pickup truck and went to his house to get a gas tank to burn it. However, the pickup broke down on the way. Not knowing what to do, Matthew abandoned the car in the university parking lot and walked home. The basement where Sarah was held was cold, dark, and damp. She was constantly freezing and had no choice but to lie down or sit because of the low ceilings. Matthew provided her with spoiled food and prevented her from using the bathroom. He wrapped a garbage bag around her waist to serve as a makeshift diaper and did not allow her to clean herself. The next day, Tina and Stephanie's co-workers noticed that they did not show up for work, raising concerns. Tina's supervisor went to her home and discovered that Tina's pickup truck was missing. Looking through the window, she saw an unusual mess inside the house. The employee eventually broke the window to enter the house, where she discovered a significant amount of blood and immediately called the police. When the police arrived and searched the house, they found no one there. The officers discovered that the children had not attended school that day. Inside the house, although no bodies were found, there was a significant amount of blood in almost every room. The investigation was aided by the discovery of empty trash bags in the house, which contained receipts for items purchased at a hardware store. Officers took this information to the store and requested video footage from a specific date and time. Although the man who made the purchase was not clearly visible in the footage, they were able to track him as he walked to his car, identifying it as a Toyota. At the same time, a search was underway for Tina's missing pickup truck, which was eventually found in the university parking lot. Inside the truck, police found empty gas cans. The police then gathered all the evidence and focused their search on the drivers of Toyotas. Ironically, Matthew's driver's license had a picture of him wearing the same shirt seen in the store footage, leading to his identification. The police deployed a special weapons and tactics team to Matthew's home. When they entered, Matthew, who was asleep on the couch and unaware of the situation, did not resist and was taken into custody without incident. After the arrest, the police conducted a search of Matthew's home and found Sarah in the basement. She was lying on a pile of leaves, tied up, but still alive. The police were shocked by the state of Matthew's home, which was littered with leaves, bags of leaves hanging from the walls, and the floor covered in leaves. In the living room, there was a pile of leaves, large enough to raise suspicions about what might be hidden underneath, especially given the disappearances of Stephanie, Tina, and Cody. Despite the chaos of the scene, the police found no evidence of a crime. They discovered strange and seemingly meaningless drawings on the doors and kitchen walls. The refrigerator contained the bodies of beavers and squirrels. When questioned, Matthew remained calm and quiet. He claimed the murders were the result of a botched burglary. Matthew intended to steal valuables and was surprised when Tina and Stephanie returned home. In a panic, he killed them. The police rejected the initial account, asserting that the crime was premeditated. Matthew found that the garage was open and that in the morning, everyone had left the house. Near the property, they found a sleeping bag and a burned area under a tree, which showed signs of having been climbed multiple times for a better view. They also found large bags of trash in the garage, along with a receipt indicating that Matthew had purchased them a week before the murders. Prosecutors pointed out that burglars typically do not linger in homes for hours. They take what they need and leave quickly. The police asked Matthew where he had hidden the victims. Initially, Matthew refused to reveal the location of the bodies, which led to a deal being struck. Facing the death penalty for his crimes, he was promised a reduced sentence if he disclosed the location of the bodies. Although he initially resisted, Matthew eventually wrote a confession and agreed to lead the police to the scene. He took them to a large tree in the reserve, where he had created a hollow at the top, accessible only by climbing equipment. Inside, the police discovered large plastic garbage bags filled with body parts. Matthew also requested that the police not damage the tree, as he believed it was sacred. However, the tree was cut down. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman pleaded guilty to the murders of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, as well as to the abuse of their bodies. He also pleaded guilty to kidnapping and abusing Sarah for 4 days. As a result, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah faced many challenges but remained strong and played a key role in the investigation, receiving praise from the police for her courage. She wanted the opportunity to speak at Matthew's sentencing to confront him directly. However, she was advised against doing so. After losing her mother and brother, she moved in with her father and stepmother. Sarah later wrote a book called Girl in the Leaves. When Sarah turned 16, her father and stepmother were charged with assaulting her. A protective order was issued, and Sarah moved in with another relative. Not much has been heard from her since then, but she is safe and well. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Maria Fernanda Quesada. For most people, family is the most important aspect of life. However, finding a trustworthy partner who can be the ideal husband and father is not always easy. Infatuation can cloud judgment, leading some individuals to commit to unsuitable partners, which can sometimes turn life into a nightmare. Maria Fernanda Quesada lived in La Gloria, Nueva Costa Rica. Born in 1994, she was a kind and beautiful girl. She was a strong and independent woman with dreams of becoming a mother. She wasn't overly focused on her career. Instead, she valued the warmth and comfort of a family. She wished for siblings, but was her parents' only child. Her family is close-knit and loving, often held up as a model for other families. Her parents provided her with a comfortable home and a good education, which is still not accessible to everyone in Costa Rica. The environment there is not as favorable as in many other Latin American countries. Maria had a great relationship with her family, and she was especially close to her maternal aunt. They were similar in age, shared experiences, supported one another, and regularly met and communicated. Maria shared all her secrets with her aunt, and they felt like best friends. People recognized Maria as a friendly and outgoing person who could easily connect with strangers, which helped her make many friends. She fell in love for the first time at 19, believing it was a genuine feeling that would lead to happiness, a family, children, and a cozy cottage by the sea. Unfortunately, the reality was different. Her boyfriend took advantage of her and left when he became interested in someone else. To make matters worse, Maria discovered she was pregnant at that time. 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy. She hoped her ex-boyfriend would care for their son, but he showed no interest in either of them. Faced with this situation, Maria had to work hard to support herself and her child, as their financial situation was tight. She wanted to provide her son with a future as good as the one her parents had given her. Fortunately, her parents did not abandon her or the baby. They continued to support them, which helped create a stable environment for the child. During this challenging time, the family offered her the support she needed. Although it was difficult, they all managed to get through it together. This all took place during a time of advanced technology, which allowed Maria to use a computer and access the internet. She didn't want to just wait for things to improve. Instead, she sought an additional source of income by learning how to make handmade soap. After trying her hand at this craft, she discovered she had the potential for even more. This marked the beginning of Maria's journey as a skilled professional with a variety of talents. In addition to selling handmade soap to friends and online, she also learned how to do manicures. She created several groups on social media to showcase her skills, and her client base quickly began to expand. Maria dreamed of building her own website and eventually opening a salon. From the start, her efforts received positive feedback, and her clients were happy with her services. At this point, her main focus was on the well-being of her child and family, and she dedicated her free time to them. Maria longed for love and a family. She dreamed of finding a man to complete her. One day, while she was out in the city gathering materials, she met Esteban Rovira Vargas. He was 16 years older than she was, and despite their age difference, Maria fell deeply in love with him. It's unclear how he left such a strong impression on her, as he was very different from her. Esteban was hot-tempered and aggressive, with a complicated past linked to crime, although he avoided discussing it. Their romance lasted several months before Maria felt ready to introduce him to her family. The meeting was chaotic. Esteban made such a strong impact that her parents were firmly opposed to him. The primary issue with her parents stemmed from Esteban's rudeness, foul language, and blatant disrespect towards others. He came across as cruel and unpredictable. When Maria's parents noticed this, Esteban reacted so violently that Maria had to intervene to prevent a scandal. In the end, Maria's parents insisted that she completely end her relationship, but their efforts were in vain. Maria had strong feelings for Esteban and was determined to stay with him no matter what. Understanding this, her parents reconciled, not wanting to jeopardize their relationship with their daughter or lose the chance to have a future grandchild. A few days later, Maria met Esteban's family, who were just like him, tough and unkind, which made Maria uncomfortable. She confided in her aunt that Esteban was the most reasonable person in his family. Despite his difficult personality, their relationship continued to grow. Esteban appears surprisingly calm around Maria, seemingly relying on her to help curb his temper. On April 6, 2019, they got married. Unfortunately, shortly after the wedding, Esteban revealed that Maria's parents had been right about him. He became increasingly abusive, starting to physically assault her almost immediately. The abuse happened every day, and Maria suffered both physical and emotional torment while trying to keep their new family together. Moreover, she was pregnant with their second child, which made her feel that if she could just hold on, things would improve after the baby was born. Above all, Maria did not want to raise another child without a father. Maria gave birth to her second child in 2020 and became increasingly overwhelmed by the situation. Just before the baby arrived, she moved in with her parents because she could no longer cope and was worried about her health and the baby's safety. After the birth, her husband seemed to have a change of heart. He visited her, sincerely apologized for his past mistakes and the pain he had caused, thanked her for their new son, and promised never to hurt her or argue with her again. Maria believed her plan had worked, but her family, especially her mother and aunt, remained skeptical. They recognized this behavior as typical of manipulators and feared the cycle would repeat. In the following months, Esteban genuinely devoted his free time to Maria and their newborn. He behaved like a caring husband and father, refraining from violence. It appeared that their family life was improving, and they began to share joyful moments together. Esteban also started to spend more time with Maria's older son, who was 7 at the time. However, Maria noticed that he seemed to show more affection for his biological child. Despite this, she felt happy about the positive changes. Esteban even changed jobs, securing a well-paying position as a Spanish teacher in a private school for foreign students, which greatly improved their financial situation. Maria frequently told her friends and family that she was genuinely happy, and even her aunt began to believe it might be true. Maria often kept in touch with her family, sharing that after the birth of their son, Esteban changed drastically. He managed to hide his aggressive and cruel nature, making family life feel like the fairy tale she had always wanted. During this time, they posted many family photos on social media, portraying themselves as happy parents with their children. It appeared to be a happy and healthy family. In this seemingly peaceful environment, more than a year went by. However, Esteban was actually suppressing his anger, which was building up like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. Eventually, he lost control. He shouted at his wife for no reason and physically harmed her, leaving bruises on her face. Maria, in tears, turned to her relatives to share what had happened. She was reluctant to go to the police, hoping that things would improve and that she could keep the family together for their child's sake. Unfortunately, the situation worsened quickly. After just a few incidents, Esteban began to pressure and torment her even more than he had before the baby was born. Her relatives urged her to end the relationship. Esteban had reverted to the cruel person he had always been, unable to control his inner demons. In December 2021, Maria decided she could no longer endure the abuse. She reported her husband, Esteban. When Maria went to the police station to file her report, she presented fresh bruises on her body. Esteban had struck her so hard that she had visible hematomas on her face. She expressed that this situation could not continue any longer. Maria was frightened for her safety and her children's well-being. During the police investigation, her claims were supported by both her family and several neighbors who had witnessed Esteban's aggressive behavior. Neighbors witnessed that she had faced constant abuse from her husband. He would provoke arguments almost every day, which often escalated into brutal beatings. Maria was so beaten down that she feared talking to Esteban, worried it would lead to another fight. Maria was frequently seen with bruises, and the cause was always the same. Ultimately, she was able to obtain a restraining order, which prohibited Esteban from approaching her or their son without her permission. She moved in with her relatives, along with her sons. Maria warned her family that her husband should not be allowed near their home. If he was seen, they should call the police. Even after obtaining a restraining order, Esteban was often spotted near the Quesada family's home. While he appeared to be loitering, it was clear he was looking for a chance to see Maria. Each time he was seen uninvited, he would leave quickly to avoid provoking a police call. But he continued to appear in the area, which was very concerning. Maria and Esteban were going through a divorce, along with custody and property disputes. Unfortunately, the process was progressing too slowly. Maria hoped to prove her husband's cruelty to ensure he would lose the chance to see their son. She feared that if he had contact with the boy, he would suffer the same abuse she had endured. On March 3, 2022, he showed up at Maria's parents' house without her permission. Some of her relatives were there, and they greeted Esteban with displeasure at the door. He requested to speak with Maria to address some issues regarding their divorce, emphasized that the discussion would focus on the division of their shared property. Witnesses present during the meeting observed that, despite his calm demeanor, Esteban was struggling to control his emotions. Maria consented to talk with her husband, particularly since he was not shouting or using foul language as he typically did. However, her family was concerned and advised her not to leave with a man they viewed as dangerous. Esteban insisted that Maria accompany him to retrieve some personal items she had forgotten during their hasty move. He also requested that their conversation remain private. Eventually, he persuaded her to get into the car. Esteban asked Maria to leave their older son with relatives, but he wants her to take the younger son with her. Maria agreed to this arrangement. As soon as they left her parents' house, arguments erupted again, starting the moment they were in the car. Esteban became more aggressive and eventually lost his temper, shouting loudly. They pulled over near the Quesada family home, where a neighbor noticed them arguing inside the car. Upon arriving at the house where they had lived before separating, noise and upheaval could be heard. It seemed that Esteban was breaking things or physically harming his wife again. The child was crying from inside the house. Their 2-year-old son could be heard pleading with his father to stop. Outside, a neighbor heard Maria calling for help. The neighbor rushed to the house but realized he had left his phone behind and couldn't call the police. At that moment, Esteban called his sister, revealing that he had just killed his ex-wife in front of their son, claiming she had attacked him first. His sister was horrified and urged him to take the child and go to the police, but he ignored her. Instead, Esteban left the scene of the crime, still wearing the blood-stained shirt from the incident. He placed the child in the front passenger seat of the car and quickly drove away. Several neighbors called the police, and Esteban's sister also reported the incident. When the police arrived, Esteban had already left the scene. They sealed off the area where Maria was lying, where she was attacked by her husband in the kitchen. The police spoke to the neighbors who were gathered outside Esteban's home. The neighbors confirmed that Esteban had a long history of violent behavior. He was generally disliked in the community due to his rude and aggressive demeanor, often shouting at people for no reason, leading people to keep their distance. Although Maria eventually left him and obtained a restraining order, she made the mistake of getting back into his car. Meanwhile, a white car was driving down the road with Esteban and their 2-year-old son inside. The child was the only witness to the horrific murder, watching as his father stabbed his mother 11 times, mainly in her upper body and head. Maria tried to fight back, but she was powerless. Judging by the position of several wounds, Esteban had likely attacked her from behind. It did not seem as though she had provoked him. Her desperate attempts to fend off his assault were doomed to fail. Realizing that Esteban was trying to escape with their child, a large-scale operation was organized to capture him. The criminal's vehicle was put on alert, and several patrol units were dispatched to intercept him. His condition and intentions were unclear, and the child might be in danger. The police were hesitant to use force to stop the suspect because they feared for the boy's safety. Instead, they decided to follow Esteban. However, catching or even locating him proved to be extremely difficult. Shortly after the search began, officers found Esteban's abandoned car just a few kilometers from the scene of the violent incident, suggesting that Esteban had already switched vehicles. The police had no information about the car Esteban was currently using, and it appeared that he and the child had only one escape route, crossing the border. This raised the risk of losing track of them entirely, as Esteban could take a bus, use another car, or get a ride from someone. The authorities set up checkpoints in hopes of catching Esteban when he tried to cross the border. Fortunately, their strategy paid off. Within a few hours, they tracked him down at a checkpoint while he was attempting to pass through in a stolen vehicle. The border officers had been notified, so when he presented his identification, the chase ended. Esteban was arrested without any resistance. His 2-year-old son had been in the passenger seat the whole time and thankfully had not been harmed. During the search of the vehicle, authorities discovered a firearm and a blood-stained knife, which could have been the murder weapon used against Maria. It was puzzling why the suspect had not disposed of these items earlier. He was promptly sent to the police in his hometown and imprisoned. Esteban now faced serious charges of femicide and was subject to severe penalties typically imposed for such crimes in Latin America. After investigating the knife found in the vehicle, it was confirmed that the blood on it belonged to Maria, and the handle carried Esteban's fingerprints, leaving no doubt about his guilt. The custody of Maria's children was to be transferred to her parents. The older child was quickly placed in the care of Maria's parents. However, there were troubles involving the younger child. Even though Esteban had murdered the child's mother right in front of him and was awaiting trial in prison, Esteban still retained custody rights over the child under Costa Rican law. The boy became embroiled in a custody dispute between the families of his biological parents. The Vargas family aggressively sought custody, employing questionable tactics. They attempted to discredit Maria, suggesting that this could somehow excuse the murder. They claimed that Maria had neglected her sons for a long time and did not care for them properly. Instead, she pressured Esteban, which led him to lash out at her. Ultimately, they suggested that one day, during a heated argument related to their divorce, Maria attacked Esteban, leaving him no choice but to defend himself with a kitchen knife, resulting in wounds inflicted to stop her. They also attempted to portray Maria's parents negatively, arguing that they were unfit guardians. Maria's relatives had long spoken of her suffering from psychological and physical abuse, with accusations of beatings and threats supported by family, friends, and neighbors. Esteban's family depicted him as a victim, which many found hard to believe. Of course, this was a blatant lie. However, statements from Esteban's relatives complicated the prosecution's investigation, forcing them to challenge these claims and gather evidence to support the Quesada family. As a result, a meeting was held to address the situation, which sparked activism from various feminist groups closely following this troubling case of violence. In March 2023, large protests demonstrated strong support for the victim's family. It was evident that the misleading narrative from Esteban and his relatives did not convince anyone, except perhaps the defense. The public wanted to ensure that the murderer faced severe punishment. Women across the country asserted that a lack of accountability only led to more violent crimes, and the statistics clearly supported their claims. The trial of Esteban Rivera Vargas, who abused his family, resumed in Santa Cruz on March 9, 2023. The prosecution argued that he deliberately killed his wife. In contrast, the defense, supported by Esteban and his family, claimed that he was actually the victim. However, their claims were quickly proven false, as the prosecution presented multiple witnesses, including neighbors, who testified to Esteban's violent behavior. Sadly, Maria's youth and innocence led her to make poor decisions, while the Vargas family's lies were exposed through forensic analysis, which conclusively resolved the case. The nature of Maria's injuries ruled out the possibility that she had attacked Esteban. 2 strikes to her back clearly indicated a planned assault. Esteban had intended to harm her from the outset. Maria's younger son could not serve as a witness due to his age. However, recordings of conversations with their 2-year-old child were presented in court. These recordings revealed that Esteban repeatedly acted aggressively and often assaulted Maria. The older son also testified, corroborating his brother's claims about the violence inflicted by Esteban. Both children were afraid of him, especially the older son, who was not Esteban's biological child and held a strong bias against him. As a result of their traumatic experiences and the loss of their mother, both sons were sent for psychological treatment. The prosecution sought a 37-year prison sentence for the defendant, while the defense maintained his innocence throughout the trial, attempting to reduce his sentence and even aiming for an acquittal. Fortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful. In May 2023, the court ruled in favor of Maria. The defendant, Esteban Rivera Vargas, was sentenced to 35 years and 8 months in prison, and he is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security facility. Additionally, Esteban was ordered to pay 75 million Costa Rican colones in compensation to Maria's family. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This harrowing tale unfolded in North America, with Mexico City as its backdrop. The central figure in this story is Alejandra Lafuente, a resident of Mexico City. Alejandra is described as having striking brunette hair with bright brown eyes that highlight her thick, black lashes. She had a fit and athletic build, which she diligently maintained through fitness routines, yoga, and breathing exercises. Alejandra took great pride in her appearance and loved self-care rituals. Frequent visits to beauty salons, massage sessions, and spas showcased her commitment to personal upkeep. During warm weather, she could be found lounging on the beach while engaging in scientific work. On cloudy days, she often visited tanning salons. It's safe to say that Alejandra had a strong sense of self-love and viewed herself as an epitome of feminine beauty. Career-wise, Alejandra also exhibited ambition and determination not to lag behind others' successes. Her father is Dr. Alberto Dente, an esteemed psychiatrist well known for his research into mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and manic disorders. Notably revered for both his scientific contributions and experiments with patients, which many view as groundbreaking, Dr. Dente's achievements set high standards for Alejandra, who aspired to attain similar levels of success. She pursued a similar path as her father. To achieve this, she enrolled at one of the top universities for psychiatry and graduated with honors. Her perseverance, resourcefulness, and extraordinary intelligence, along with her father's connections, greatly assisted her in writing and defending her thesis on manic syndrome. However, Alejandra did not later engage in psychiatry. She became drawn to the field of psychotherapy instead. With the financial support from her father, the young professional obtained a license and set up her own practice in a new business center located in the heart of the capital city. There was no shortage of clients, but Alejandra decided to focus solely on women. Women struggling with eating disorders, depression, relationship issues, and low self-esteem sought her counseling services. Alejandra worked diligently to help solve family problems. Yet, despite her professional success, her personal life was less fulfilling. Alejandra's first marriage ended in divorce. She had two charming girls who inherited their mother's eyes and their father's sense of humor. Despite the failed marriage, Alejandra was not discouraged. To her, having two children was not a reason to neglect herself or give up on finding happiness again. She still aspired to meet a man who could be both an ideal partner for her and a good father figure for her daughters. Sometime after their separation, Alejandra's ex-husband would visit their home on weekends to spend time with their daughters and assist Alejandra with household chores if necessary. These visits had become routine for the couple. On one such visit, Alejandra asked him to enter through the backyard because she claimed that the lock on the front door was jammed. The man entered as requested. Alejandra told him that their youngest daughter was bathing and asked him to join them in the bathroom without suspecting anything amiss. The man entered the bathroom and saw tape on the floor. Where was his daughter? The bathtub was filled, but no one. Suddenly, right at that very second, he sensed something was terribly wrong. His ex-wife stood behind him with a hammer in her hand. She struck him on the head with all her might, then delivered another blow. He fell instantly. A gaping hole in his skull poured blood everywhere. Later, experts determined the man had no chance to save himself. Death came almost immediately after the first blow from the heavy weapon. His eldest daughter, who unexpectedly returned early from a friend's house, witnessed this truly horrifying scene. Alejandra, it was determined, suffered from severe mental distress. She frequently directed her anger toward friends, and even her husband, leaving visible scratches on his arms and neck. Housemates constantly witnessed her tantrums over seemingly nothing and erratic behavior. This time, things went out of control. The eldest daughter ran out of the house screaming for help instantly, and a neighbor rushed over to call the police squad. Alejandra was arrested and charged with murder by professionals at the station and placed in a cell where she stayed for a month until her first hearing. At trial, Alejandra denied any guilt. Her lawyers argued self-defense. According to them, her ex-husband was intensely jealous of Alejandra and falsely accused her of bringing men into the house, delusions that could affect their little girl's psyche negatively. She said that he showed up unexpectedly at his ex-wife's house, sneaking through the back door to catch her with another man. When he found Alejandra in the bathroom, he allegedly pounced on her and she had to defend herself, resulting in 2 blows to his head. On June 14, 2012, the sentence was handed down. Considering the evidence presented by the defense and the presence of 2 minor children, Alejandra was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months. Thanks to the coordinated work of lawyers and the financial support of her father, the term bars was replaced with a suspended sentence. A couple of months later, an appeal was filed again with a request to drop the charges with by. The argument is assault in self-defense. Human rights activists felt deep sympathy for Alejandra, portrayed at trial as a victim of domestic violence. As a result, the court reviewed the case anew and handed down an acquittal. Following her release, Alejandra continued her psychological counseling. She also maintained an image as a victim of gender inequality, fighting for her rights, just like many women in North America do. Ultimately, this portrayal made Alejandra even more popular among potential clients. Soon after, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera, a prominent Mexican businessman and son of Adrian Carrera Francis. Alan was tall and handsome with a statuesque stature. His father had been head of special services for the Central District and achieved considerable success in his career. Quickly, Alan expanded his business, creating a chain of construction stores that popped up all over the country. However, not all parts of Alan's business were above board. Some aspects were deeply entwined with criminal activities, which led to his father's removal from his position after one financial fraud incident was uncovered. Additionally, Alan had ties with a criminal group engaged in transporting psychotropic substances to the United States. The base for this illicit operation was located in a border town and guarded by bribed police officers. This group controlled a significant portion of psychoactive substance trafficking in the South. Evidence finally tied Alan's father to these illegal activities. Under pressure during interrogation, he gave a statement implicating himself and faced a potential 20-year prison sentence due to these revelations. On July 18, 2000, Adrian Carrera was released early. Following his release, he dedicated all his time to his son and legitimate business. His son grew up quickly, adopting his father's views and experiences. After graduating from college, Alan Carrera decided to follow in his father's footsteps and Alan showed a keen interest in a household appliance store. Despite his young age, he managed it entirely on his own. While it wasn't as large as his father's enterprise, it generated substantial revenue. Alan was always surrounded by many admirers, but he had been in love with a classmate since childhood and eventually married her. She was intelligent, beautiful, and from a respectable family. Their marriage was brief yet eventful. They had a lovely daughter together. However, the demands of work and Alan's frequent absences led to their divorce. The separation was extremely difficult for him, as he had loved her since high school. Subsequent relationships failed to bring him joy, leading to feelings of loneliness and sadness that resulted in excessive drinking. Alan developed a harmful habit as he tried various ways to cope with his prolonged depression and affinity for alcohol, attending meetings. Eventually, fate brought him to renowned psychiatrist Dr. Alberto. Interestingly enough, Dr. Alberto was the father of Maria Alejandra, Alan's ex-wife, who was also navigating through a challenging divorce herself. Despite their separation, she couldn't allow herself to be close to anyone else either. Maria Alejandra also sought counseling from a therapist. However, Dr. Alberto explained that ethically he could not treat both her and Alan simultaneously. He recommended she see another professional therapist without disclosing that this therapist would be Alejandra, his daughter. He was described as a pleasant man and quite wealthy. Without much thought, Alejandra asked her client to bring her ex-husband for another consultation. According to the therapist, she could resolve their issue in a single session and break the strong bond between the former spouses. From the first moments of the confidential session, Alejandra began implementing her plan to seduce the entrepreneur. The results were immediate. Right after the session, Alan invited the therapist for a cup of coffee to discuss family problems. Quite rapidly, an affair developed between them. Soon enough, Alan's ex-wife discovered their relationship and was shocked. She even considered reporting the incident to the doctor's ethics committee, but ultimately did not. Alejandra, being a very competent specialist, managed to convince her client to let go of her jealousy and move on from her former spouse. As a result, Alan's ex-wife decided not to file any complaints and discontinued their sessions. Meanwhile, Alan and Alejandra's relationship progressed quickly. A few months after their first date, they decided to move in together. 2 months later, they decided to formalize their relationship. However, Alan had no inkling of his fiancée's hidden secrets or the reasons behind her divorce from her ex-husband. In April 2014, Alan decided to visit his parents over a weekend and used the opportunity to talk about his beloved and their upcoming wedding. Alan's parents were extremely surprised by this news so late in the process. They had never heard of Alejandra before, which struck them as very unusual. A week after meeting with his parents, Alan and Alejandra registered their marriage. Interestingly, though, Alejandra asked her husband not to invite friends and relatives. No invitations were sent out at all. The wedding was intended to be modest due to budget constraints, which did not permit inviting everyone they would have liked. However, as it turned out later, the bride's father did attend the marriage ceremony. Initially, the young couple's life seemed like a fairy tale, full of happiness and numerous plans and desires. But this didn't last long. Alejandra couldn't conceal her hysterical character, which foreshadowed the horrifying conclusion of this story that no one anticipated. The relationship between the newlyweds began to change dramatically. Alan was a rather secretive person and didn't share details of his personal life with friends. Consequently, little was known about what happened behind their closed doors. Nonetheless, it became evident that their former relationship had developed significant cracks, and the couple no longer appeared as happy as they once were. After meeting Alejandra, Alan distanced himself from his family. The final quarrel was the wedding to which his parents were not invited. After this event, they even ceased calling each other. Alan's remaining friends noticed that his spouse grew increasingly nervous and sometimes behaved inadequately, quickly losing her temper. Following a few such incidents, Alan felt deeply ashamed and decided to minimize joint meetings. Quarrels in the family occurred daily and were almost always unfounded. One evening, according to her own testimony, Alejandra decided to go through her husband's cell phone and discovered correspondences with several women containing inappropriate content. Understandably, it was impossible for her to ignore such things. Alejandra reported in court that her husband beat her, insulted her, and humiliated her in every possible way. When she discovered his infidelity as well, saving the marriage seemed pointless. For reasons unknown, Alejandra did not pursue traditional methods of psychotherapy to try and salvage the relationship. Instead, consumed by thoughts of her husband's cheating, she resolved to deal with Alan using a method already familiar to her. Once she made this decision, all her attention focused on devising a perfect murder plan. While Alan went about his regular, measured routine, he remained oblivious to the looming events. He communicated infrequently with his family. However, he couldn't ignore the annual feast celebrating his grandfather's birthday. As expected, Alan attended the event. Nevertheless, his parents made it clear that his wife wasn't welcome in their home. This situation upset Alejandra and worsened the couple's relationship. On October 31, 2014, Alan's phone last sent a text confirming he had arrived home safely after the party. From that moment on, his absence extended to his work too. This was highly unusual because Alan was known for his dedication to work. He hadn't missed work before, especially with an important store launch approaching where his presence was crucial. The cause of this sudden disappearance lay in Alejandra's horrifying plan executed after Alan's return from the celebration. Following a fierce argument, she spiked his milk with a powerful sleeping pill before suffocating him with a pillow. Alejandra watched as Alan struggled unsuccessfully to remove the pillow and catch his breath. After that, Alejandra dragged Alan's body to their neighbor's garden to retrieve an electric saw. Bearing a grim smile, she dismembered her husband's body into pieces. She then bagged the remains and ensured no identifying features remained by removing fingers and teeth. It was these details that would help the investigation in identifying the individual if the body was discovered. Alejandra packed all the bags into suitcases to transport the corpse out of the house without drawing suspicion. However, she did not succeed. As dawn approached, Alejandra could not leave the house with the suitcase unnoticed. An elderly neighbor who suffered from insomnia watched her from her window. She found the young woman's early departure and strange behavior. Additionally, for some reason, Alejandra's husband did not help lift the heavier suitcases, which added to her strange behavior as she continually looked around. At dawn, Alejandra returned home, which further surprised the vigilant neighbor. As it later turned out, Alejandra had scattered bags containing her ex-husband's remains across different neighborhoods to cover her tracks. The following day, she resumed her normal life. On November 6, 2014, police officers in Mexico City made a gruesome discovery. Human remains were found in a vacant lot near the city's outskirts. A few days later, bags containing arms and legs were located in various parts of the capital. The most chilling detail was the absence of fingers from these limbs. Teams of officers were quickly assembled, and they methodically combed through the streets. Their primary objective was to locate the head and other missing parts of the victim and prevent further atrocities from occurring. Despite their efforts, the fingers and head were never found. However, by forensic experts, it was determined that all discovered remains belonged to the same individual. Sadly, without fingers or teeth, identifying this person proved impossible. To divert suspicion from herself, Alejandra began sending messages to Alan's relatives. Her aim was to avert suspicion. However, she only aggravated matters. Unbeknownst to her, Alan had recently distanced himself from his family and had no contact with his relatives. Alejandra informed Alan's parents that they were going on vacation and would be out of reach. This plan quickly unraveled when Alberto, Alejandra's father, began making phone calls to Alan's father's house. Alberto sought to find out if his son-in-law's family had any idea of Alejandra's whereabouts. He hadn't heard from her in some time, and the family was quite worried about missing their counseling sessions. Later, Alberto reached out to Alan's relatives again. This time, he informed them that his daughter had been located, but had to be forcibly admitted to a clinic. She was suffering from depression due to her husband's infidelity. This news deeply alarmed the relatives, leading them to search for Alan without success. Subsequently, Alan's family turned to the police for help. Laboratory experts decided they needed to compare the remains recently discovered with Alan's characteristics. The resemblance was 100%. His relatives also identified him without a doubt. This was particularly hard on Alan's grandfather. Soon after the identification, he fell ill with heart disease, as Alan was his only grandson. The investigation team obtained a search warrant for Alan's home and office. They discovered a patch of freshly disturbed earth in the backyard. Upon digging, they found human fingers and teeth. Alejandra was immediately apprehended. More blood traces were found in one of the rooms, as well as on the trunk of a car and in the garage. Initially, Alejandra denied any involvement, hoping she could escape punishment as she reportedly had with her previous husband. However, investigators quickly pieced together the case. An elderly witness provided critical testimony. Her timeline matched Alan's estimated time of death. It came to light that Alejandra used her job to obtain a powerful sleeping pill, a medication typically accessible only to medical professionals, which further implicated her in the crime. The evidence linked Alejandra directly to her husband's brutal murder. CCTV footage corroborated that Alan had entered their house but never left. Additionally, this footage confirmed that suitcases were later removed from the house. On December 10, 2014, the jury delivered its verdict. Ale got life imprisonment for murder with cruelty in an attempt to hide it. Using her official position didn't help. Her father's connections and bribes couldn't save her either. All he managed was a closed trial, away from the public eye and the press. Sadly, he did it for his career. Now, hardly anyone will seek help from a specialist who raised such a ruthless monster and couldn't spot problems in his own daughter. During the trial, thoughts about the death of Alejandra's first husband popped up too. But the passage of time meant no evidence was found. There were even whispers about her father's involvement in what happened. People suspected he worked with her on these crimes out of some misguided scientific interest. Yet, no proof surfaced. After many appeals from the victim's side, her sentence changed to death. This is almost unheard of in Mexico today. Death sentences are super rare. Plus, she can't ask for a case review. Her house and property must go to the victim's family. Though, who can be comforted by that when their loved one is gone? Alejandra showed she was pragmatic and cruel. She had major mental health issues, although medical exams said otherwise. Influenced by her father and using her position, she executed her manic plans without fear. After her first crime went unpunished, which let her off the hook, Alejandra felt untouchable and kept doing evil things. Maybe Alan would still be alive if this dreadful woman hadn't been acquitted before. Don't you think justice needs to catch up faster? We can't let monsters roam free because of loopholes or failures in our system. Let's ensure people like Alejandra face consequences right away so they don't get a chance to continue their wicked ways. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lisa Holm. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998 in a small town in Sweden. It is a peaceful place where she lives with her parents and older sister. Lisa is a kind, positive, and determined person. Even before finishing her studies, she decided that she wanted to go to Australia to study architecture. Lisa has also had a lot of experience traveling with her family, visiting many other countries. In the summer of 2015, when Lisa turned 17, she finally found her first job at a cafe about a 40-minute drive from home. During the first few weeks, her parents still drove her to work. However, not long after, her father decided to buy her a scooter so that she could get around on her own. Lisa had this type of driver's license before she turned 18, which is the age required to apply for a car driver's license. She was very happy to receive this gift because it was an opportunity for her to go to work by herself without having to rely on others. However, in the first few weeks, her father still accompanied her by car because Lisa lacked experience driving on the road. She only worked on weekends, and her father accompanied her every morning and evening. This habit continued until June 7th, when he finally allowed her to drive herself to the cafe. Around lunchtime, her parents decided to visit her at work and have lunch together. That day, the cafe was quite crowded, so Lisa was very busy with work. She took a short break to have lunch with her parents, then they returned home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father saying that she was coming home. Just 3 minutes later, her father received a call from Lisa, but no one answered. He heard some voices in the background and thought that Lisa had accidentally called his number while talking to her colleague. He also heard the sound of a car door closing. He called Lisa's name several times, but no one answered. Then, he ended the call and started waiting for her to come home. However, she did not appear. After an hour, Lisa's parents began to worry. They thought something might have happened to her on the way since she should have arrived by now. This was the first time she had ridden a scooter alone, and her father was very concerned about her safety. He tried calling her several times, but Lisa's phone was turned off. After waiting for a while, her father decided to set off, hoping to meet Lisa on the way because she could have taken the shortest route. Her father was afraid that Lisa might have had an accident, so he drove carefully, paying attention to the road but did not see his daughter. Finally, he went to the cafe but could not find Lisa. When he arrived at her workplace, he noticed that Lisa's scooter was parked in front of the building. At that moment, he panicked because he could not find his daughter despite having come all this way. When he saw her scooter, he immediately calmed down, thinking that maybe she was just late for work for some reason. However, there was no one in the cafe, and he noticed something else. Lisa's scooter key was still in the ignition, with a helmet dangling from the handle. These things made him believe that something was wrong with his daughter. She would never leave the key in the scooter while leaving it unattended in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother contacted the cafe owner, hoping to find clues about her daughter's whereabouts. However, the cafe owner claimed that he did not know where Lisa was. According to the cafe owner, Lisa had called the staff around 6 p.m. and they told her that they were closing the cafe. After the call from Lisa's mother, the cafe owner immediately got in his car and went to the cafe. On the way, the cafe owner also contacted four friends who lived nearby, asking them to help find Lisa. When the cafe owner arrived, they began searching both the cafe and the surrounding area. They hoped that Lisa might have decided to take the bus instead of the scooter. Lisa's mother and sister drove to the bus station in their town to check the schedule. Unfortunately, Lisa was not on the bus. Her family immediately contacted the police. It was dark. The police quickly expanded the search. The fact that Lisa's motorbike was left in the parking lot with the keys made them consider the possibility that Lisa had been kidnapped. Such incidents are quite rare in Sweden, especially in the remote rural area where she lived. Therefore, the police quickly mobilized teams with sniffer dogs, while other officers began knocking on doors near the cafe. When Lisa's classmates and friends learned about her missing, they shared information about the case on social media, hoping to attract more attention and find witnesses. The search went on all night but yielded no results. On Monday morning, the police department announced Lisa's missing to the public and asked anyone with information to come forward. At the same time, a man working in a warehouse across the street from the cafe found a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. Detectives had checked the warehouse the night Lisa went missing but did not find the glove. They later showed the glove to Lisa's parents, who confirmed that it belonged to their daughter. This further strengthened the theory that Lisa had been kidnapped, and the police intensified their search efforts. By that time, news of Lisa's missing had captured the nation's attention, and hundreds of volunteers had joined the search. On Tuesday, the police received some alarming new leads. Volunteers searched the area around a dirt road a few hundred yards from the cafe. During the investigation of the crime scene, investigators collected several pieces of evidence related to Lisa, including a phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a broken smartphone screen. They later found other parts of the smartphone, Lisa's ID card, and several other receipts scattered along the dirt road. This evidence made the police almost certain that Lisa had been kidnapped. They mobilized every available resource for the search, and the number of participants grew. The case became a major news topic in Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers from across the country joined the search. A local missing persons organization also joined the effort. The scale of the search for Lisa became the largest in the country's modern history, with more than 1,000 people involved in total. The police received numerous calls from people with information about Lisa's missing. One woman reported that before Lisa went missing, she had gone jogging. While she was jogging, a man standing next to his car stopped her and asked for directions to a city she had never heard of. He spoke to her in English. She tried to give him directions using Google Maps, but he asked her to get in his car and show him the way using his navigation device. The woman found this request suspicious, so she refused and continued walking. She also told the police that she believed she had seen the man among the workers repairing a warehouse across from the cafe. Lisa's co-workers shared a testimony with the police. On the day of her missing, a witness noticed two men standing across from the coffee shop, looking in the direction of where she worked. The witness didn't think much of it at the time, but after Lisa went missing, they decided to share it with the police. The next day, Wednesday, Lisa's father and some friends searched the dirt road where her belongings had been found the day before. When they went a little further, they found Lisa's driver's license and house keys. This suggested that Lisa may have been abducted and forced to leave the coffee shop via this road. Her kidnapper may have thrown her belongings out of the car or other vehicle they used to abduct her. Police and volunteers focused their efforts in this area, but no other items were found. That evening, a friend of Lisa's father was returning home from his search. As he passed the coffee shop, he noticed that the police had left the warehouse where Lisa's gloves were found. The man decided to go inside the coffee shop to look for any other clues. This time, he used his car's flashlight to walk around the premises since it was dark. While there, he noticed a shiny object lying on the floor. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a pair of women's earrings. The man later reported this to the police, who showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the jewelry belonged to their daughter. The police then sealed off the shed and conducted a more thorough inspection. The lead detective explained that on the first day of the search for Lisa, the priority was to find her, so the shed had not been fully inspected, and they may have missed small items such as earrings. After conducting an in-depth investigation, forensic experts and sniffer dogs were called in. They discovered a remarkable piece of evidence hidden behind a wall, which was traces of human feces. Although it seemed unrelated to the case, forensic experts developed an hypothesis regarding it. When criminals commit serious and horrifying crimes, their bodies secrete a large amount of adrenaline, which can lead them to be unable to control their urge to urinate. This often happens to murderers, who frequently urinate before or during the crime. Based on the discovery of Lisa's gloves and earrings in the warehouse area, the police hypothesized that if she had been kidnapped, the perpetrator might have dragged her into this building. Therefore, detectives did not rule out the possibility that the kidnapper may have consumed a large amount of adrenaline, leading to an inability to control himself and necessitating urination at the scene. Consequently, fecal samples were taken and sent for DNA analysis. On Friday, the search area was expanded, and volunteers went to a farm about 3.2 kilometers from the cafe. This farm complex consisted of large buildings where many people worked. The search team decided to check the entire area. However, after they arrived, two men appeared at the farm. They spoke no Swedish and only communicated in English. One of them claimed that the police had come to the farm to check on them. But the leader of the search party did not believe him, as he thought he would be notified if it were true. So he decided to continue searching. The two men walked around the farm, observing for a while before driving away. After about an hour, the search team discovered a pile of branches behind the cowshed. Upon closer inspection, they found a motorcycle helmet, jacket, and headphones. Police quickly arrived on the scene and confirmed that these items belonged to Lisa. They then sent forensic experts to the farm to conduct a more thorough investigation. The detectives heard stories about two strange men who tried to stop volunteers from checking the farm. The police also recalled a report about a woman who had encountered a man acting suspiciously while jogging and who spoke English. In fact, they had some idea of his identity from the very beginning of the search. They visited the houses surrounding the cafe. In one of the houses, two Lithuanian brothers lived with the wife of one of them. All three of them spoke no Swedish and communicated only in English. They were the only people within a few miles who did not speak the local language. The police also had other indirect reasons to suspect them. The brothers worked at the warehouse across the street from the cafe and at the farm where Lisa's helmet was found. They were familiar with these locations and the road leading to their house. Since there were no other suspects, the police decided to question all three of them. Forensic experts, along with volunteers, went to the farm to continue the investigation. They noticed an old trailer, surrounded by tall grass, that looked like it hadn't been used in years. However, the grass around the door was flattened, indicating that something had been there recently. In addition, the grass under the door was also matted down, indicating that the door had not been opened for a long time. When the forensic experts opened the door, they were immediately hit by a strong stench of decay. Inside the trailer were several wardrobes, most of which had previously been used as changing rooms for workers. All but one were locked, leading experts to suspect that Lisa's body might be in one of them. They began opening each one and eventually discovered Lisa's body in an open cupboard, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the cupboard, the perpetrator had managed to squeeze the victim inside. Lisa had been tied up with a rope around her neck and duct tape wrapped around her head. Her pants had been pulled down, and her shirt had been pulled up. Medical experts determined that Lisa had died from strangulation, but no signs of sexual assault were found. All of her clothes were turned over to the lab for testing. As news of the discovery of her body spread rapidly across the country, headlines in Sweden focused on Lisa's abduction. When her body was found and the public learned of her brutal murder, the incident shocked the entire nation. Since such crimes are extremely rare in Sweden, everyone was taken aback that someone could commit such a brutal act. On the same day her body was discovered, something unusual and quite strange happened. A YouTube user came across a video posted 13 days before the murder, titled 13, which had a countdown timer. The most disturbing detail was that the name of the channel that posted the video was Lisa. News of this video quickly spread across the media, leaving many people stunned by the coincidence. Some began to speculate that someone had predicted the murder, but the truth was much simpler. Someone had likely changed the channel name and video title after discovering Lisa's body. This could have been to suggest another conspiracy theory or just a cruel joke. The police are trying their best to quickly find the culprit in this murder. When Lisa's body was discovered, investigators brought in the owners of the farm, Narigis Belavicius, his brother and his brother's wife for questioning. However, all of them denied any involvement in the case. They claimed that at the time of the kidnapping, they were at home together to provide each other with an alibi. According to their story, Narigis was sleeping in his room while his wife was preparing dinner and Narigis' brother was on the computer. Around 8 p.m., Narigis woke up and went to the gas station to buy pizza and cigarettes. The police had some doubts about the testimony of them, as they might have been protecting each other. Although the police collected their DNA samples, investigators still did not find direct evidence linking them to the murder case. Forensic experts worked diligently at relevant locations, such as the barn and the farm, using all available resources and manpower, and their efforts finally paid off. In the barn area, there was a small room resembling an office, with a large window overlooking the cafe. When examining this room, experts discovered 15 different male semen stains on the wall and floor near the window. This suggested that someone had stood there, observing the cafe staff, including Lisa. The collected semen samples were promptly sent to the laboratory, where experts extracted DNA profiles from these samples. The results of the DNA analysis showed that all 15 semen traces matched the DNA of Narigis. Additionally, fecal samples found in the barn also matched his DNA. In the adjacent room, which had previously been used to store cow's milk, forensic experts found a pipe about 2 feet above the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust except for a small strip. The size of the strip matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Blood was found on the pipe, and DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Narigis. On the floor near the pipe, they also found a piece of rope that matched the one on the pipe. Experts conducted tests and identified 2 DNA samples, Lisa's and Narigis's. This was an important step in the police investigation. They had connected the suspect to the rope used to kill the victim. Additionally, a strand of Lisa's hair was found in the room. Another crucial piece of evidence was Narigis's DNA found on her jacket. Based on this evidence, the police believed that Lisa had been murdered there. Police pieced together a similar sequence of events. Narigis had been observing the cafe for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her. Based on the jogger's account, he may have pretended to ask Lisa for directions to a certain city or used some other tactic to trick her. Narigis may have then lured Lisa into his car to enter a route into the GPS system. Since Lisa was a kind person who always tried to help others, she may have agreed. Once she was in the car, the perpetrator covered her mouth and drove to a secluded place. At the scene, the perpetrator tied a rope around the victim's neck and hung her from a pipe. According to doctors, this action may have excited the perpetrator so much that he experienced an adrenaline rush, causing him to defecate on the spot. After the victim died, he placed Lisa's body in his car and drove to the farm, throwing her belongings out the window on the way. He hid the victim's body in the trailer's storage locker and covered it with old clothes. The entire process took less than an hour. Despite the overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence. His wife and brother were not involved and were released. They quickly left Sweden and returned to Lithuania. Preparations for the trial were intense. Narigis claimed that he had worked in that warehouse for a long time, so his DNA could have been present due to his work. Additionally, he had alibis from his wife and brother, although there were doubts about the reliability of both sources in court. This could work in his favor, although many uncertainties remained. However, the presence of Narigis's DNA on the victim's clothes could only be explained by his direct contact with her on the day of the murder. Furthermore, the police also found a witness who saw Narigis's car near the cafe just before and after Lisa's abduction. According to the witness, the car had traveled several times on the road between the cafe and the farm at a time when Narigis was believed to be asleep at home, according to his brother and his wife. After months of investigation, experts used the most advanced equipment to examine all the collected evidence. They found traces of Narigis's DNA on most of Lisa's clothing, including inside her underwear. With public interest piqued, the investigators continued to search for more clues that could influence the proceedings and strengthen Narigis's connection to the case. They traveled to Lithuania to speak with his wife and his brother again. The woman maintained that he had not left the house between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., but when his brother was questioned, the detectives quickly obtained the information they wanted. After presenting the man with all the evidence against his brother and the details of what he had done to the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to cooperate with the police. He claimed that Narigis was not home that night, returning only around 7:30 p.m. He looked dirty and immediately washed all his clothes. As the police began questioning all the residents and visiting their homes, Narigis whispered to his brother to tell the police that he had been home during that time. Narigis later explained that he was afraid of being charged with a crime he did not commit, as he was an immigrant and had no alibi at the time of the abduction. The brother truly believed his cousin was innocent, but after hearing all the evidence, he realized that his initial thoughts might have been incorrect. Lisa's funeral took place just a month after her murder. The church where the funeral was held could only accommodate 130 people, but many more came to say goodbye to her. The organizers decided to set up extra chairs and screens outside so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder and once again attracted national attention, placing everyone involved under a great deal of pressure. Narigis's lawyer claimed that his client's DNA could have been found on the victim's clothes because he had worked in the barn. However, the prosecutor argued that this explanation did not make sense, especially concerning Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA could have ended up there would be if he had touched the victim's underwear. The lawyer was unable to produce any concrete evidence to prove his client's innocence. Instead, he theorized that the real killer was Narigis's brother. According to this theory, the brother took multiple samples of Narigis's DNA and deliberately left them on the victim's body and at the crime scene to confuse the case. But this defense was quickly dismissed. The trial lasted a month, and Narigis was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in a high-security prison. Although in Sweden, this prison offers the same amenities as a 3-star hotel. The lawyer appealed but was rejected. In early 2017, Narigis himself applied to be transferred to a prison in his home country of Lithuania for reasons that remain unclear. Lithuanian prisons are significantly worse than those in Sweden. Yet the court still accepted the defendant's request. After all, providing comfortable conditions of detention cost Swedish taxpayers hundreds of dollars per day per prisoner. That same year, Narigis appealed to the Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life to 15 years. However, his joy was short-lived. A few weeks later, the court overturned the decision, and Narigis was once again sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of returning to a comfortable cell in Sweden. 5 years later, in August 2022, Narigis was transferred to a prison in Lithuania. While other prisoners were being moved to another ward, one of them attacked and seriously injured Narigis, leading to his death on the way to the hospital. As for the suspect's wife, her involvement in the case has not been completely ruled out. The police stressed that it was almost impossible for her to be directly involved in the kidnapping or murder. If that were the case, experts would have found her DNA on the victim's clothes or belongings. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew about Narigis's crime and tried to help him escape punishment by providing a false alibi. Narigis's brother also raised questions. Cafe employees reported seeing two men standing near the barn and watching them. Assuming that one of them was Narigis himself, the other man could have been his brother. However, the man's DNA was not found in the barn or on Lisa's clothes, making it unlikely that he was involved in the murder.